Welcome to the Edison Prep info session. Glad that you're here tonight. We have a lot of information to cover about how the college process works and how the sausage is made. Things have changed so much since parents were in college. So I know we have a variety of both parents and students watching this. So hopefully you find it empowering. The earlier information you can get in the process, then you can do a much better job and either get into better schools or cut the cost of college or both. So let's dive right in. So, what we're going to cover tonight is components of the college application process, how things have changed post-COVID. The changes in the past 5 years have been way more than the prior 12 years of this presentation. The importance of GPA and taking hard classes, what the alphabet soup of SAT, ACT are and why they matter, why prepare, how to prepare for the tests, how scores and your GPA can impact both admission and merit aid, and then a little bit about what we do. Now, our story, my wife and I approach everything we do as far as teaching SAT, ACT from a place of gratitude. If you met me in real life, you'd see I'm not a Division I recruited athlete. My parents were broke. My dad climbed telephone poles for a living. They said, find a way to pay for these colleges that you're so enamored with. Otherwise, local you down the street is just fine. I did not want that. And my wife and I had creepily similar life stories. Hopefully nobody talks about ACT scores on first dates and things. So her mom taught preschool, my dad climbed telephone poles, and we both were happily bribed for our scores and grateful because I'm 43. I still have friends paying off student loans from undergrad, and that is back then. Now my alma mater is officially 268% as expensive. So there are a lot of reasons to work hard, get good grades, get good test scores back then, even more so now. For the first 12 years that we were a company, it was just my wife and I doing all the tutoring, and we'll cover more on what's transpired these last few years later. But we have grown to a small SWAT team of 160,000 hours of experience with a little over a dozen tutors that we now have. And so we've had the pleasure of working with 25,000 students over the last 14 years. We're nerdy. We still take the test each year. My wife took it last month in December of 2024 to keep our materials nerdy and helpful and relevant so we can understand what our students are going through and the tests that are shifting. Now, let's talk about why we do this presentation. As I mentioned earlier, things are so different. The admit rates, dramatically different. College costs, obviously very different. GPAs and grade inflation, super different. Also, AP classes, access to them, what's a normal number, have changed so much. And now early action and decision is now a big thing. It was probably not when a lot of the parents listening to this were in high school, or at least not as prevalent. Now, why the alphabet soup of tests cover the cover? In theory, you're covering reading, writing, math, and data analysis when you are in school. And so what's covered on these tests is reading, writing, math, and data analysis. Science, for example, on the ACT, you can call it science. It's really just interpreting graphs and charts. Now, there's a lot of misinformation on what is a good SAT score, good ACT score. So the SAT goes from 200 to 800 on each section, with the average being around a 530 on each section. And then the ACT, they average your 4 section scores from 1 to 36 on English, math, reading, and science. And the national average, moms don't believe me when I do phone calls all day with them, is a 19.4 out of 36. It's the lowest it's been since Nixon was in office. Now, what really happens in lunchrooms and at orchestra concerts is lots and lots of fibbing. If you're watching this or if your student's watching this, it's so important to know that people fib a lot. From a self-confidence standpoint, we see all the dirty laundry. We have 3,000 kids take mocks virtually and in person at our office, and we see scores of 14 on the ACT, we see scores of cold 34s on the ACT, and everything in between. So tell your student, from a self-esteem standpoint, don't play into the drama. You're all going to scatter to different colleges and just focus on your own scores, your own grades, etc. Now, this is the SAT curve. So it's a 1,600 point curve. And what is ostensibly 1,600 points is not really, because you can go very far up the curve, almost halfway, without really doing much other than guessing. And that red box right there, a 300 point range in that red box, is basically where about 70% of kids that enroll in 4-year residential colleges will tend to go. And they save the entire top 300 points just for the top 10% of testers. If it helps your student to mentally think about it, depending on what part of the range they're in, each question can be worth 6 or 7 points more as you get to the higher ranges. But basically, if your student can prep and go up 120 or more points, if you look at schools that have an average of 1220 versus 1340 versus 1460, they're unrelated categories of schools. And so if your student can work hard and study and you can super score, more on that later, then they will be in great shape. Now, the equivalent curve is for the ACT, and we call it our 10-20-30 curve, 10-20-30 rule rather. So given this curve, you get a 10. A 10 means randomly guessing. 20, 19.4 is national average. And a 30 is just one kid per room. It doesn't feel like that. I guarantee if you ask your student, does it feel like there's only one person per room that gets a 30 through 36 combined in their lunchroom? They will say, no way. But that is the truth. That's the data. Now, why prep for these tests? Now, many parents, maybe you, are part of this group of 300,000 people on Facebook called Paying for College 101, where there's lots of misinformation, information, sometimes misinformation, lots of drama and stuff. And so the number one thing that happens on that group, it's a free country, people can believe what they want, but the number one copy-paste statement you see all the time is, quote, the SAT, ACT are the most stressful parts of the college process. You can believe that. It is literally the exact opposite of that. Because you know what terrifies me? What terrifies me is the person who got 9 C's freshman year, and it's over. Because any school that's okay with 9 C's freshman year is okay with a 24, a 29, a 36. It doesn't really matter. And so you can't go delete those bad grades. They're there. You're stuck with them. Whereas look at me. I'm old. As long as your credit card clears, College Board's happy to have you come right in, etc. So from a calmness standpoint, your student knowing I'm going to study really hard for these tests, I can study. You can even Google how to delete an ACT score. They're your scores. You can do it. So not that it matters. Colleges want to count your best scores. It makes them look good in the rankings. And so it should be, if it's properly thought of, it's calming and de-stressing to know that, yes, from day one of high school, stay on your student, get those good grades because that's the number one most important factor, and should be. You spend 4 years doing it. And then ACT, SAT, depending where you apply to school, is one of the top 4 schools, as you'll see here, one of the top 4 factors, rather, as you'll see in just a moment. Now, if your student is the secret salutatorian, are their expectations maybe a little lower than if they are needing their test scores to make up for some GPA oopses? Think of it like a sliding scale. You just don't want to be really low on both. Now, why the tests are used in admissions? In polite company, we all have to pretend that high schools are created equal or even the same species for that matter. We all know that that's not even related. I guarantee you have one friend whose kid transferred from high school A, where they were told you have a 3.1 and you're not smart enough for APs, to high school B, where, oh, here's your 4.4, here's your bucket of APs. Awkward, but that's what happens all the time. So grade inflation's real. High schools don't all grade the same. And I assembled, the people watching this video are the only people, of course, whose kids did not cheat their way big time through COVID cyber school, but GPA was getting flimsy before COVID and post-COVID and things are happening. Especially because many parents don't realize a lot of schools do these things called like test corrections, where you can reclaim half the points you originally missed on a test. And like if you actually take advantage of many of the extra credit things, at a lot of schools it's almost mathematically impossible to get below a B or a B plus if you do all the extra credit and other correction opportunities. So it's also useful because it's the only common factor across all high schools. Is it mostly a BS detector? That's mostly what it is, a BS detector. Because if someone has a 4.9 but a 12 on the ACT, that would be weird, and that's less exaggeration than you think. I see it in our mock tests that are in the office all the time. So let's look at, if your kid goes to a 4-year college, at some point they will take the HERI survey, H-E-R-I, the link is in the bottom left, and go find on this slide what the percent of kids that reported, self-reported, an A plus, A, or A minus average in high school back in the year you graduated. I graduated in 2000, so I'm right there at 48% or so. So look how much has gone up, and then COVID, pew, at the end. So it's a lot. Now, this is not everyone who went to high school. This is people who went to 4-year colleges. Not everyone graduates from high school. Not everyone goes to college. But if you're attending these types of presentations, oftentimes your kid is looking at a 4-year college. And so, yes, this is where we're at. So this is not how it worked in the 90s or the 80s, and certainly not before that. So if you compare this graph right here to this, so from Nixon until COVID, literally the average was just basically hovering from 20 to 21, and that's it. And then ever since COVID, bam, 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 bam. And now it's going down to the 19s. It's actually updated 2024, is now 19.4. And that's with some people opting out of the testing. Imagine if everyone were forced to test. Would it probably be 18 or 17 point something? For sure. There's definitely COVID learning loss. The things are not the way they used to be when we founded this company 15 years ago. So when you compare this, the prior one with the grade inflation slide to this slide, now you understand why parents are confused. So let's talk about a tale of two Waltons. So we are headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia, where there are 2 schools, one public, one private, near our office. So right over here, there's one of the best public schools in all of Georgia, Walton High School in East Cobb. And then there's a private school called George Walton Academy that is just south of UGA. And What parents need to educate themselves about, ideally before the first day of high school, so they can understand how important it is to get good grades, is the level of grade inflation that's occurring. So look at 2016 versus 2019 here at Walton. So just in 3 years, the top 10% went from 4.275 to 4.389. Now, mind you, this is pre-COVID. I don't even want to know what it'll be after COVID. So what happened was my personal pet issue. If I ever win the lottery, I will retire and I will work on student financial literacy. Financial literacy for young people is my pet issue. And I was on a financial podcast talking about cutting the cost of college. And I used this example because Walton's amazing and publishes this data so transparently. It went viral. And so supposedly their administration started getting phone calls about their legendary grade inflation, which was not my goal in sharing that, and they don't publish the data anymore. So I didn't cherry pick them. There are far worse ones in terms of inflation here in Atlanta, but across the nation. There's tons of articles if you Google grade inflation that pop up all over the place, both at the high school and the college level. So this is the first Walton. Now, not to be outdone, the other George Walton, look at the top left corner. Does this mean that 17% of the entire class never got a single unweighted B ever? It's wild, but that's how it is. Yet, over 25% of the class had a 15 or lower on the ACT if you look at that. So the data, I have tons of slides of these because I like collecting data and screenshots, but I'll leave you with those two, the tale of two Waltons. So when you look at this, then things start to make sense. If good old mom looks at the transcript at Walton and says, oh look, 4.013, my kid is darn near perfect, that's the 70th percentile, top 30%. If I show that person an 1150 on the SAT, also 70th percentile, top 30%, there's not the same confetti and congratulations emojis happening. So parents just need to reset their mental mindset on what these numbers mean for GPA and such. Now, and it's not just those two. There's others. I have a whole folder. Like I said, there's plenty of schools where a ton of people have top 5% GPAs or higher. Now, one of our main feeder schools here in Atlanta is very awesome, and they have a very transparent profile they send to colleges because high schools send a profile when you apply to colleges. Because if you're applying from somewhere in Georgia to the University of Idaho, they have no clue what Riverwood High School is over in Idaho. So they send this brag sheet that says data on what APs are offered and math tracks and rigor and GPA distribution, maybe test score distribution, etc. Everyone's looking at the top left corner right now. Ignore that. I want everyone watching this to pay attention to the middle bar. So are you telling me that only 6% separates the middle 50% of the entire grade, 88.53 to 94.42? So if your student works really hard junior year and goes up 3% while their friends slide 3% because they just don't do too much, yes, you could jump over half the entire student body. So stay on your student about keeping that GPA up. Now, does that also mean that not a single person in this high school had below a 79.5? That's awkward. I had plenty of friends who had 75s, who had 71s when I was in high school. Like C's were a thing in the 90s. They definitely were. Not so much now. They've officially been declared an endangered species by the EPA, probably, if not yet. They should be. Now, let's talk about what that means. When everyone's getting sky-high grades, look at the bottom left-hand corner. UCLA, this is real data straight from their website. The URL's right there. 3.95 to 4.0 is the middle 50%. Only 25% of people had below a 3.95. So 75% of all of UCLA had 0 or 1B. Like 2 Bs could be the death penalty. And that's not at Harvard, that's at UCLA. And the thing is, when you're not allowed, more on that later with the test optional section, when you can't even use SAT, ACT scores allowed, it's a million-way tie for first place. They could probably knock over the whole class and refill it 3 times just with people with the same GPA because GPA is being inflated. Now, but the thing is, grade inflation has been talked about. This slide is important because no one talks about grade compression. So work on your student to have them work and keep it hard because they don't realize how big the difference of just 2%, 3% can make in admissions. Now, if you're really interested in this topic, if you Google my last name and the word grade inflation, I've been on a couple podcasts about it. I have a lot of fun data beyond the scope of this presentation, but hopefully this has been enough to help educate your student as to the importance of grade inflation and grade compression. Now, College of Charleston, they're a fine university. They're a good university. No one's saying that they're an elite university from an admissions standpoint, but you look at it. Even in a school that's relatively reasonable to get into, 2/3 of the class had a 3.75 plus. This is data straight from their common data set. And at Auburn, 45% had a 4.0 and 83% had a 3.5 or higher. So things are way different than when we started this company back in 2010. So here in Georgia, UGA is a very big school of interest to a lot of our students, obviously. And so I know this data. Our company tutors 550 kids a year who get into UGA, like that's like 6 or 8% of the total. So we know this data intuitively, but I couldn't prove it. So I literally paused the tutoring session I was in when David Graves, the UGA admissions director, tweeted this because I know it, but I need to prove it. So look at the bottom left corner. So and this is back in 2020, things have been inflating since then, obviously. That was pre-COVID data. And so 92% of the core semester grades were A, 8% B, and almost no C, D's, and F's. So if you're watching this and UGA is on your list, we call it the one hand rule. If you can keep the number of core B's the first 6 semesters of high school in one hand, then there's very few surprises. If you need 2 hands or 2 hands plus 1 foot, then things can get awkward because the average admit at UGA, not Harvard, got just over 3.3 B's. That's it. So that is a difference than when mom and dad were applying. Now, therefore, I'm telling you all this stuff, like, isn't this an SAT, ACT presentation? No, it's a how the sausage is made presentation. So it's important that we be providing a good service to families and not just be the person who helps you get a good SAT, ACT score, but looking at the whole picture. If we help you get a 36 on the ACT, only to find out, oops, you didn't realize and you got 7 C's, then it was all for nothing. So that's why we do this. So all this data to start off the presentation, if a 3.7 is a top 45% GPA at a lot of schools in Atlanta and around the world, then if your student takes a cold mock test, shouldn't they expect to maybe get around a top 45% score, a 22 on the ACT or an 1120? Absolutely. So even though we tutor from a pretty skewed and motivated slice of Atlanta and beyond, that's around what we see. So a cold 30, a cold 1400, it's rare. So out of each weekend we proctor mocks, yeah, there's 1 or 2, but 1 or 2 out of all the mocks. And so what you're seeing when you see people share their stats is after studying, after super scoring, after the Instagram filter has been applied, you're seeing all the after. You're not seeing all the work before that went into it. So it'll be fine. No matter what the initial score is, you can work at it, you can retake it, things are fine. Now, one of the most important changes in this millennium, obviously, is ChatGPT. There's a college counselor named Terry Crawford who tweeted this, where he convened a group of admissions leaders who've read essays and things, and half the essays were faked by ChatGPT, half were from students, and had them guess. And sorry, my image of me is covering part of the tweet, but more than half of them were wrong, meaning that it was worse than a coin flip when it should have been better than a coin flip. And that was ChatGPT 3. Imagine ChatGPT 4, 5, 6, 7, how much better it gets. So they're scared. And it's not just my hypothesis. You look at this. Duke came right out and said in the Duke newspaper in February 2024, we're just no longer assuming that the essay is an accurate reflection of the student's actual writing ability. Between mom helping, counselors helping, ChatGPT helping, it's there. It'll be read, it'll be skimmed, but it's not. That is a definite fear. What's verifiable on the transcript? Grades, rigor. Did you take AP, IB, dual enrollment, and test scores? So things that are more verifiable obviously become more important if they're starting to get skeptical, which is what Duke is basically saying here. Now, I love that parents that we are tutoring their kids right now are old enough now that I can use this slide and it makes sense. So Billy Madison, not the classiest movie in the world, but if you've seen it, if you want to be a winner, go play dodgeball against 6-year-olds. And so yes, if these tests, imagine if these tests did not exist, and your kid goes to a really elite high school and is in the bottom 20% of their class. That'd be terrifying. So if you're at a good school, you should be glad these tests exist because, yeah, wouldn't it be better to go from a game theory standpoint? Wouldn't it be better to go to Sadville High and be valedictorian? And so it's awkward, but that is where you got to look at this whole how the sausage is made. Now, the admissions process, in a nutshell, just like high school counselors are overworked, underpaid. The admissions officers, overworked, underpaid, flying around, living out of Hampton Inns, visiting high schools, reading applications, drowning in applications. 176,000 applications at UCLA for a freshman class of a little over 6,000. They're drowning in essays and applications. So, because now the thing is, they do the best job they can with the data they're given. GPA, imperfect. Who gets APs and how many and why, and it's political at your school? Imperfect. SAT, ACT, imperfect. Letters of recommendation, probably the worst thing of all. Just all these pieces are imperfect. And so that's why if you can give them good data when they say, oh, this essay for the business school is optional, please fill it out. Because the more data is always better than less data as they're trying to make these decisions with these so many applications. Now, the big 5 numbers. Think of it as the entree on the plate. So 80% of your application's weight at a lot of schools is just the big 5. So GPA, number of APs, IB, SAT, ACT, etc. Now, at some schools, like Auburn, who got rid of their essay, it's not just the entree, it's the entire plate because they got rid of the essay. There are no other things. If I had enough students applying to Auburn, I could almost reverse engineer an algorithm maybe that they use because they make decisions on tens of thousands of applications for early action in just a mere 2 weeks or so. And they came out and they said, we're no longer doing the essay because it's not really possible to read it in that time. So think of it as, at a minimum, your entree. The big 5 numbers are your entree, with the garnish being your activities and your essays and other things, or up to 100% depending where you apply. Now, NACAC, National Association of College Admissions Counselors, said they survey their people all the time. They ask them, hey, what of these topics are considerably important, moderately important, limited importance, no importance? The top 4 things, if you read this, put differently, are numbers, 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 and numbers. Grades in all courses, prep grades in hard courses, strength of curriculum, AP, IB, and test scores. Numbers, 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 and numbers. With the garnish, as I mentioned, being the things that are below that. So keeping your numbers strong is the number one most important thing from day one of freshman year. Now, when this first came out, God bless him. God bless the dean of Emory for being on. Like, what he said has been said to me privately in conversations at all these, North Point college fairs, all these places, all the time, privately, but in publicly. He, in the Inside Higher Ed, which is like the Wall Street Journal for education, he came out and said, we're not as trusting, frankly, of GPA these days. Doesn't mean what it used to mean. And he said, therefore, the admissions office here is weighing external assessment more heavily than GPA, APs, SAT, ACT, because there's a lack of trust. There has been, but he's saying publicly. Good for him, because that is courage that most have not had a chance to do publicly, but I hope his mortgage is paid off, but I think he's still working there, and good for him. Now, let's go ahead and talk about how to keep that 80% solid. So get great grades every year. Freshman, sophomore, junior year, get great grades. Freshman, sophomore year, get involved in a few activities that you enjoy and are going to stick with. And second semester, if your kid is in Algebra 2 or higher, more on this later, then yes, second semester, late second semester, take a mock test of SAT and ACT so you can make a plan for the summer after sophomore year / junior year. And avoid senioritis, because they can rescind your admissions if you have some oopses GPA-wise after you get in and start having fun. Now, when I was in high school, I went to a pretty nice high school, and it's out on the outskirts of St. Louis, and I was one of the 5 people in my grade that had 6 APs by graduation. Now, 6 APs is not nearly the kind of thing that only 1% of people would have in the graduating class. So it all depends on what your school offers. I teach pro bono boot camps in South Georgia. If your school offers just one total AP class, they can't hold it against you for what is not available. But if your school offers 37 APs and you take the goose egg, that would be awkward. So take whatever you can handle from a rigor standpoint, but the expectation compared to when parents were in high school is much higher on the AP and IB front. Now, a couple schools have stopped offering them entirely. Again, you're going to be okay, but look at the policies. So at UGA, it's more or less reached a plateau because it can't get any higher, but it's just creeped up roughly 0.3, 0.4 per year since we started this company 15 years ago. Again, at UGA, not at Harvard. So 9.5 by graduation, not by the time you're applying. Now, the importance, unfortunately or fortunately, of AP classes, the number one most important thing that it gives you is the weighted GPA boost. Think back to the Walton slides from before. The GPA boost is big. And so is virtue signaling, I care, etc. And the sad part is it's actually better to get 100% in an AP class and a 1 on the exam, if you even take it, then an 89.4, because that, again, B's, we have to keep the B's away at all times, and a 5 on the AP exam. Now, at Emory, like you just saw, the pendulum might be swinging. I hope I'll change this slide if more schools like Emory start coming out with that statement, but really the answer is both. Like take the AP exam, prove that it actually meant something, your GPA did, and also get a good GPA. Now, one of my college counselor friends is Michael Zarek. He wrote a great book, College Counseling for the Rest of Us, and his words, this is so true, there is no greater financial aid than a student finishing in 4 years. Think of AP classes or dual enrollment or IB as being graduation insurance. If your kid walks in with 12 credits from their APs, even if they have a rough semester, one semester, or oops happens, or they want to do study abroad or do a double major and still graduate on time, they can. My wife and I both double majored. I had a minor on top of that, and not because I'm awesome and ooh la la, I walked with enough AP credit that no stress, I was able to do that. So please, if your student studies hard all year, please don't let them skip that AP class, or AP test rather. Now, Admissions officers are drowning. So what happens is Netflix, the Netflix analogy here, Michigan last year emailed a ton of their kids, almost all of them said, hey, can you please click this yellow button to verify your continued interest? They hadn't decided yet. They were just hoping that kids, and we all know our kids, they do not check email. Email is not a weekly activity. Please check your email more than once a week. And so, especially during the college process, check your email all the time. And they were hoping that some people that wouldn't apply could give them a hint as to how engaged they were. I don't think that's an accurate read, but that's what Michigan did. And my buddy who used to work at NYU a long time ago, I can't take credit for the meme here at the bottom. And so when he worked there, started working there, it was like 32,000 applications. When he left, it was over 100,000 applications. And so it's not personal. He wishes he had more time to read the applications, but he's buried, drowning, and there's a deadline for the release date. And so reading things holistically, like if you're in the bubble, is your application being read pretty nicely? Sure. If you are, that Carson Beck, the starting quarterback, is your application read that much? No. If you have 19 C's, is your application read that much? Of course not. And so you got to read the room, understand the context, but as long as you can get your numbers to get you in their ballpark, that your actual stuff is heavily considered and read, that's the goal. And the application explosions, Rutgers went up 60%, Fordham went up a ton, U of Tennessee went up 40% this year, University of Texas out-of-state applications went up 48% this year. There's just an explosion because of the Common App. It's making things hard. Now, this is another slide from that group we love to hate, Paying for College 101. God bless the admissions officer at Penn State for being honest. In corporate America, if parents listen to this call, you've been in corporate meetings where someone asks you a question, and even though you know the answer, you realize you're supposed to say, let me research that and get back to you, even though you know the answer, because you can't actually admit it in public. So she was asked, wow, you have 100,000 applications. How many people do you have to handle this? But she said 8 or 9. And she's like, what do you mean? And so in the thread, as the mom followed up with the comments, yeah. So she's like, basically, unless you're applying to the business school or the honors college, yeah, it's mostly done by robots. It's mostly formulaic, based on GPA, other stuff, etc. So that's from the mouths of babes. Like that is how it comes straight out. And I have a ton of slides like this. This is my favorite one though, because there was, I think, almost 700 comments before that thread got zapped on there. Now, Carol and Topeka. It's important that parents know. The person reading your application essay may or may not ever have stepped foot on the college campus that they're reading for or ever will. Like here locally, Georgia Tech has gone from 3 to 5 temporary readers to over 60 this year. It's not their fault. The Common App. It's the Common App's fault because just click, 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 application explosion, spray and pray. The Common App has really caused a lot of problems. I wish the Common App didn't exist, to be frank, because as you can tell right by now, I'm not sappy. But the amount of teenage mental stress and angst and application fees from parents that it causes when kids, you'd have want it. When I applied to college. When I applied to college, I was halfway through my Case Western application, and halfway through, as I was using the electronic typewriter Kinko's, that dates me, I was like, yeah, I don't really care. And so I didn't apply to Case Western. So now it's easier, and it's causing a lot of these problems we're talking about. So that is why, as much as we might romantically want the essay to be the be-all, end-all that can solve 4 years of GPA sin, it may not even be read by someone who is ever going to step foot on your campus, and that's awkward. So that's been covered in the Wall Street Journal, other big sources more recently. People like us have known about it for a while, and if parents need a side hustle, you can go on Indeed.com and look. There's reader jobs that you could possibly buy for. Now, one note on waitlists: you should treat them like the lottery. They're rare. They are for the benefit of the school, not your kid. And so look at Fairfield. Fairfield is not. They're not super elite. They're not bad. They're above average. They're good. And of these 6,371 kids they admitted to the wait list, they put in the wait list, only 9 got in. And so again, it's based on so they can pluck whoever they want if their numbers don't quite hit the exact number they wanted, and that's awkward. So move on. Once you get waitlisted, hope it happens, just like I hope I win Mega Millions. But then move on and make smart decisions. Now, parents are very confused about early decision, early action, regular decision, this whole alphabet soup that goes around. So let's talk about what it means. Early decision means that if you get in, you're bound to go. You have to pay whatever price tag they give you within, unless there's technicalities, but basically it's binding, and that's why you get a giant bump at most schools for doing ED. Early action is not binding, but you find out earlier, which is kind of fun. We encourage you to do early action for any school that you can get yourself arrayed to do so. And regular decision at a lot of schools is increasingly should be called irregular decision because, like Davidson, like 80-something% of their class they admit via early. And there's like table scraps, Kroger before the snowstorm in Atlanta type stuff left for the regular round. So if you can get your ducks in a row, please apply early action to places if you can. Now, early decision. Tulane didn't even try to hide it. They like money. They like a lot of money. FICO scores, not test scores, are what matter there. And so you get in 68% of the time if you send scores. 9% early action. And our humble little company here in Sandy Springs, Georgia, literally tutors more students each week than Tulane regular decision admitted all of last year combined on the entire planet, 109. So it's silly. So this is the kind of research. Your students going to college. They're the ones that should research this, but it's on them. But knowing if you want to play that card, you only get to play it at one school for early decision, and it's a giant impact at almost any school that does it. Now, understanding your students' context. When students in our tutoring sessions, we focus on SAT, ACT, but sometimes students show us their college list, and it has to be balanced because kids are applying to more schools, waitlist mania, confusion, and there's a lot more surprises now than there used to be. Help your kid understand stats and context and strategy so they actually have reaches and targets and safeties. A safety is a school that you would actually attend rather than take a gap year if the only school that you got into was that one school. Because a lot of our students say, so my list is NFL quarterback, president, astronaut, or insert occupation that's not super exciting, like the equivalent. And so would you actually do that? No, I would probably go find an internship and apply again next year. Then that's not a real safety because we see that all the time these days. And also, I'm not sappy, as you can tell. Heartbreaking conversations. My wife and I literally did rock, paper, scissors to have these conversations. First 14 years we were a company, we never had a single person that had an unintentional gap year where they got shut out of all their colleges physically. And this year we've had quite a few. So we had 5, 6 worst phone calls ever. So please help your student make a list that is realistic and has at least some wins on there. Now, it's so important to avoid SAT, ACT combo tests. They are a pox on our industry, and the larger the company, the more likely they offer them. If your school has a PTSA that is doing these as a fundraiser of a fake test, please stop them from hurting kids because these tests, the SAT and ACT spend literally over $2 million to calibrate each actual official test. So some random tutoring company in Skokie, Illinois you can't make Coca-Cola that's more Coke than Coke. It's silly. And so to try to save like 10 minutes, like the sample size of questions being shrunken, it's like a political poll. It becomes inaccurate. So you want to use real tests, full length tests only. And you can download one from Khan Academy. You can download one from the ACT website. It's not hard. You can do it free. We offer mock tests free in person and virtually every weekend the entire year. They're free. But you want to use real tests. Your student deserves to make that Pepsi versus Coke decision based on real tests. Because let me tell you a story. This kid, I met with him. He went to the Weber school right near our office, and his mom swore up and down, this is totally a real test that you see here on the left. And she swore it was a real test. I'm like, are you sure? And so once we did some digging, he just felt super different than a 22 during our tutoring session. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to pause our tutoring for a week. You got to come in and take a mock test at our office, a real test. Humor me. And what do you know? He got a 28 at our office. He went up 6 points. So is this a tutoring company that advertises an average increase of around 5 points? Might that be where the 5 points comes from? Big agencies using fake tests kills me. So your student deserves better. If it's mini, if it's combo where you can do SAT, ACT shortened on one day, run away screaming. And don't tell your friends not to do it. It's terrible. Because I have a whole folder of screenshots I could use of this. It's the same story every time where it's off by 150 points or 5 points or whatever. Now, what you want to do is use real mock tests instead. That link right there, edisonprep.com/mocks, is an evergreen link. It works forever. And again, we don't make you do a timeshare sales pitch type thing. When you get the mock, our reputation speaks for itself. So we send you a beautiful PDF report that has the results and the details and things in it. And if you choose to contact us, great. And if not, that's okay too. It's a public service we do for the community. Now, one of my favorite phone calls I got in the last few years was a news reporter here at 11 Alive News in Atlanta called me and said, I'm looking for Brian. I'm like, that's me. And she goes, so I've heard you have lots of data about why test optional is not real, which is a great way to start a conversation. I'm like, well, yes, I do. Want to have fun? Like, let's come do a segment. So we came. And I blew the narrative that her producer had clearly handed her out of the water because the narrative is, totally optional. So would I be living homeless under a bridge on I-85 if test optional were actually real? Yes. So I'm one of the foremost experts in the entire nation on the topic of test optional, which sounds crazy to say, but I have. I've spent 5 figures of money collecting test optional data. I've spoken at 4 national conferences just in the last 18 months because I'm known as the test optional data guy. There's me speaking at Clemson at a conference last year in that picture down there. So, because the thing is, in America, the most secret thing in the whole wide world is and should be the nuclear launch codes. But second, a close second, is test optional data from American universities with this is the percent of kids that got in who sent scores and this is the percent who didn't. good luck trying to get that. You'll see in the next slides what that looks like. Now, let's talk about the test optional landscape here as we're recording this in January of 2025. About 8% of colleges are test blind, meaning they can't even use scores at all. So the majority of those physically are just the University of California system alone after the lawsuit, more on that later. And about 10% of schools and growing are test mandatory. 5 of the 6 Ivies went back last year, then Carnegie Mellon, then Hopkins, and then all of Florida, they never went optional. Georgia's back, all the military academies are back, Georgetown's back, etc. So we don't even bother updating our social media accounts anymore when another one announces because it would clog our feed. So it just keeps going back. And the more elite the university, the more likely they have gone back. But that leaves 80% of the schools in America practicing some version on the spectrum of test optional admissions, and that's where the messy middle really is, and decoding the differences and how optional is a place, or is it optional for admission but not for merit aid? There's so many flavors of test optional, it's not funny. Now, what test optional means, to be clear, is that you have the option to apply without scores. The same way you have the option to not do activities, the same way you have the option of not taking AP classes. It doesn't mean it can't help. As you're going to see in the next slides, it can help a lot. So optional means it's optional, meaning we won't automatically reject you if you don't send it. Test blind means they cannot use it. And like I said, a big place, Alabama, right next door to us, at least for right now, we'll see next year. Alabama, not the hardest school to get into admissions-wise, but their entire merit grid is based just on scores, basically. Big money. If you get a single day 30 on the ACT, 112 grand at Alabama. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of mortgage payments. And so that is why it can still matter even at air quotes optional schools. Now, this slide here, Rick Clark, he's awesome. He's the long-serving, he got elevated to even higher position recently, but he's the long-serving director of admissions at Georgia Tech. Awesome dude. He himself would agree. He's not the biggest fan of tests, not by a large stretch. But even he is frustrated. He says it's not fair because it isn't fair what we're doing to these kids. So it'd be great in an ideal world, like his quote says, if we publish the stats of who applied with scores, without scores, what's their admit rate, what's their enroll rate, all the data. That'd be amazing. I'm a recovering corporate consultant. I was a consultant for 10 years in the corporate world. I love data, and a lot of parents in this call do too. But good luck getting it from the schools. Now, the next slide. So Maya Angelou did not actually say this, but I like to paraphrase her and say when a college shows you their severely delayed test optional decision timeline, believe them the first time. So let's look last year. Duke and Spelman, literally, as of July 2024, their websites did not update to say whether they were going to be test optional for the kids who were literally applying in just 20 days. And we emailed them every 2 months, like, hey, any decision? Not yet, not yet, not yet. That tells you the flavor. So Reed College was test optional since I was in high school. They were walking the walk. They mean it. They are test optional. But if a school went test optional only because of COVID, and then every year begrudgingly just extends their policy by 1 year, that also tells you a lot. So you got to read the room and help your kid. Kids might be book smart. They might not understand the nuance of the politics and all the stuff, read between the lines type stuff. Now, you got to read the fine print. Test optional schools. It might be optional, for scholarships, merit aid, for athletes. If you're homeschooled, that's the big one. Competitive programs like nursing, honors college, or a sliding scale. Some schools have started ratcheting it up saying you can be test optional as long as you have a 3.8 unweighted. Otherwise, you have to apply. You have to send scores, and so there's all these flavors. Or you have to send extra essays. Or sometimes you don't send scores; they make you take remedial classes. Now, let me give you a case study. This girl I tutored, we went for it, Jaden Daniels Hail Mary style on 4th and 78, and luckily she made it. This girl, we tutored her boyfriend. He did very well. She was touring Elon University, which is test optional, supposedly, and so she was October 15th. Of her senior year. She was touring the campus, and luckily for her, some other mom asked the tour guide, so you guys at Elon are test optional, right? Any word that starts that sentence without the word yes is not a good sign for this girl. And she goes, well, I mean, mostly, not for nursing, not for homeschool, not for a couple other things, but yeah, mostly. And this girl wants nursing. So she panics, she texts her boyfriend, says, who's that guy you tutor with? I'm like, well, what's your mock? What's a mock? And so she didn't even take a mock test of anything until mid-October because her mom's like, oh, honey, you like Elon. It'll be fine. And so this is dishonest. I'm not super easy to get angry, but it's disheartening to see this. It's unfair to parents. Anyways, so we did the most tutoring of any person ever for 6 weeks, and she started a very low score. And luckily she pulled it off, and she's an empathetic, awesome human who's going to be a great nurse one day. Good for her. But it doesn't have to be that way. So you have to read the fine print so hard it hurts. Now, my buddy Brooke, she's awesome. She runs a YouTube channel called Super Tutor TV. She did a survey of 68 schools during the heart of COVID, during class of 2021, back when in 7 or 8 states you couldn't even find test sites that easily in those 7 or 8 states. Obviously, here in 2025, you can just close your eyes and do this. And other than still California is a problem. That is the case where you can find them pretty easily. But even during the heart of COVID, there's a sliding scale. I teach tutoring. I do SAT, ACT for a living. You might think I'm going to say, yeah, do tutoring no matter what. It depends. So look at my arm. My arm right here represents the West Coast. If the school that you're looking at is in one of the 3 Pacific states, are they test optional, laws optional? It's a different world out there for the most part. In the other 47 states, it's a definite maybe. So if you look at this slide right here, a lot of the Southwest, the Pacific, etc., is the people who are the biggest ones where you can actually, kids did not send. Pepperdine, only 22% of kids sent scores. So you're probably fine. Let your kid go ride a bike, do whatever, get a job at Chili's. Because yeah, it doesn't matter, not at all. But the more elite the school, or the more not on the West Coast the school is, you look at this, really, really high. Like even when places like Dartmouth were test optional, 91% of kids still sent scores. Duke, 93%, and Massachusetts, MIT is cut off. But even in 2021, 104% sent scores, meaning some kids were like, oh no, I didn't just send one, I sent both. And so that is the context that most kids do not know. So most kids in Brooks' study, about 50 of those schools out of the 60 had 2/3 or more submitting scores. Now, God bless University of Pittsburgh. Very few schools publish data by division, because at WashU's art school, might there be a little bit different scores required than in the engineering school and the business school? Sure. And so they publish it. You look here, sorry for my face covering up the test optional, but in the arts and sciences, 54% did not send scores at Pitt. Good. Nursing is 11%. Things that are more numbery, business and engineering and nursing, I hope nurses can calculate dosages, medicines, people don't die, etc. So things that are more numbery are more likely you're going to see a higher expectation for scores. Now, test optional is on a definite spectrum. So we're going to go over these in the next few slides. So required, like I mentioned the one earlier, the majority of the Ivy League, not just the elite schools. So yes, all in Georgia, here locally with our client base, we have Kennesaw and Augusta and Georgia State and Georgia Southern. Even the schools that are 1 or 2 tiers down from the famous Georgia and Georgia Tech are still mandatory. So it's not just about elite schools, all of Florida, all of Tennessee, etc., and military academies, and growing every year. Now, good for Purdue. They're proud of themselves. They coined the term test expected. Why? Because we expect tests, and so you're technically allowed to apply, but they do admit, do be advised is never a good first sentence. Do be advised that 97% of our students submitted scores. Then there's schools that are test required with rare exceptions. So from Duke's common data set, add 4746. Did 93% of those who enrolled send scores? That doesn't feel very optional. And LSU, I have no clue. That adds to 100%, so I don't know. The thing is, the data that I'm showing you on these slides, this is from the kids who enrolled. Is the valedictorian of Andover and Exeter applying to Duke and getting in? Probably. Are they going there? No, they're going to one of the Ivies. So even this 93% I show you is conservative. Of those who were actually admitted, not enrolled, is it probably 97%? Probably. And then is at least 3%, the governor's kid, quarterback, other things. So it gets really hard. And I'll give you a stat I meant to give on the 2-lane slide. So we are getting to be a larger company. We've had 8,000 students since COVID. And whenever someone does get in test optional to an elite top 25% school, they rub it in our faces and like, you said. And so, okay, we've had like 20 get into 2-lane because again, FICO scores, not test scores, money is what they want. So yes, of all the schools we've had get meaningful test optional in, we've had 2 Boston University, a horde of 2-lane, and 1 BU, or 1 BC, sorry, Boston College. But other than that, like we have no Ivies, none of that stuff. So, and we've tutored 8,000 kids, hardworking, high scoring kids. So now, Auburn, not to be outdone by Purdue, test preferred is what they call it, because 93.5% of the kids that get into Auburn sent scores. Now, let's go here. Again, Pepperdine, left arm analogy here with the West Coast. Yes, the UC system, Pepperdine, test optional, really it is. And UC system, they are SAT, ACT blind. Now note, you'll hear them say test blind, wrong. They still are allowed to use AP exam scores, and boy, do they want to use those and use AMC scores. They're grasping at straws. Think back to that UCLA example, 75% of kids having just 1B. So yes, they are still allowed to use those APs. So if your student's looking at UCs, please take some APs. Please, if you're a math geek, go to AMCs, etc. But they're desperate. They're drowning in the desert looking for data. Now, just for funsies, is Nebraska GPA optional? Yeah, they are. So Nebraska says, you know what? You have a 20? Don't even care what your GPA is. 20 tells me enough. You are an above average, above the 19.4 average. Let's go. Nebraska, let's go. And so they're couple schools like that. WashU Law School, my alma mater, Washington University of St. Louis, where I went to undergrad, their law school, they love the LSAT so much that WashU Law School, fact, just went GPA optional. So basically, if you want to just to hide your GPA and just submit your LSAT score, they can make a decision on that alone. That's wild. One of our biz dev interns is applying to law school next year, and he told me about it. I couldn't believe it. Now, common data research. All these slides I've been showing you is it's so easy to do, but parents don't know about it. So if you Google common data set and then the name of your school, it pops right up. It's a PDF going back. Sometimes they have them going back 10 years. So Bucknell, liberal arts colleges are branded as being more okay to be test optional, and that's true in general. But here, Bucknell, this is straight from their website, and so Bucknell says that test scores are, GPA and rigor and things are important. The essay is very important, but in the second column is test scores. And so, but then if you look at 96% of their kids sent scores, that just doesn't match. And so I encourage you to look at all these. Now, what was kind of awkward, I was speaking at Clemson at a conference. My slide deck was already cast in stone, loaded on the USB drive. I couldn't change it. And a dude with a big purple and orange tie, I'm assuming he might have been a admissions officer at Clemson, came in. And this is awkward because the slide is the slide. So because they are test optional. This is not my words. This is that famous Facebook group again. Parents said, kind of crazy, Clemson's test optional, yet they view test scores as very important. It's almost like they're important, but they're test optional. And so not a single thing, look at that, is even in the important column. And things like the essay and recommendations and activities are considered. Considered just feels so like meh. And so yes. And so that is nuts. And so this common data set's great. There's also people that we're fond of, college counselors that have this website called the Dataverse. If you type in college transitions Dataverse, they should charge for it. There's just a bevy of amazing information on everything you ever want around this kind of stuff. Now, who's more likely to benefit from these policies? Are you hooked or not? So if you're hooked, then you might be better able to apply to schools that are test optional than if you're not. So obviously, if you were the valedictorian and have very, very low scores, then yes, you should take the advantage of that and apply test optional. That's the strategically right thing to do. But if you have a hook, if you're a first generation college attendee, if you're an athlete, a legacy, a full pay student, someone has to keep the lights on. So they do. I used to work in healthcare for 10 years as a consultant doing the business side of hospitals. Of a certain percent of clients are not Blue Cross Blue Shield, keeping the lights on in the hospital is not hard. So I get it. It's a business. But yes, full pay students might be able to pull it off a little more. But also, they want one kid from all 50 states. If you're watching this video and you're from North Dakota, let's chat. You might have a different goal than others. But yeah, there's just different stats. Do I have 3 players who are in the NFL right now? Did they have a little different scores than their peers who got in the schools? Of course they did. But you've seen them on the field. Good job. But if you're not one of those things, then be careful. Now, let's talk about the 4-legged stool. There's a webinar that had the Duke Dean of Admissions and a couple other deans that I wish I had recorded during early COVID, where they were just trying to calm parents down. And he did this with his hand. It's such a great analogy. He goes, normally admissions is a 4-legged stool. There's what's your high school's name, what's your GPA, how many APs, SAT, ACT, and you have a stable stool right there. He goes, during COVID, can't find a test site. There goes one leg. GPA, cyber school, cheating, shenanigans, whatever. Like, you're down to a 1-legged stool of just my high school's name. And that made things hard. Admissions really hard during COVID. And so it's awkward. So that is why now that they're back, it is a nice, stable piece of data. Because think back to those slides I showed you earlier where inflation is going crazy up. Now let's look at this. Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, today. Is a 25 a top 21% score now and forever? Yes. So it's stable. The ACT sets the percentiles over time. We're talking 1% change all those times. So a college admissions officer who looks at 25, now and forever, they know that's a top 1/5 kid. That's useful as they're drowning in applications and trying to go faster. Now the Duke Dean of Admissions, this is such a polite way to say this, very corporate. He goes, during COVID when we were test optional the first year, there were certainly some students where we wish we had scores, and we didn't. AKA, hey, everyone else at Alpharetta somehow found scores during COVID. Bradley, why are you the one person who applied who didn't have them? Like that's not what he said, but it's basically what he said. And so it depends on your now. If you were in California and couldn't find seats, understood. Like that is to this day, California students still are having a hard time finding seats. That's a whole different podcast or video. Now let's talk about NFL. This is the football analogy. Think of your 4 years of grades / taking hard classes as your 4 years of game film. Think of the combine as being, it is like the ACT and SAT because it's a standard test of everything. Push-ups, bench press, all of it, etc. And so You've seen me. So could I have almost been a linebacker at my very sad Division III college that won very, very few games all 4 years? Probably. Division One, not so much, and that's awkward. And that's why, going back to my analogy, if you have a 4.9 but a 12, that'd be weird, and that's an interesting. A BS detector is the phrase I use. Now, these next few slides, it's not about Ivy worship, so we're going to go through these slides pretty quickly. But yes, 5 out of 6 Ivies went back last year. Now, Harvard reneged. Harvard promised that they were going to go test optional as a pilot till 2030, but the data was so damning it wasn't even ethical to continue. They had to go back immediately because kids were failing out, they were not performing, etc. Now, to be clear, if you look at this URL at the very top, since we founded this company, these words have been on this page for the last 14 years straight. Quote, SAT and ACT tests are better predictors of Harvard grades than high school grades. Because they are. Because if everyone has a million-way tie where they have the exact same GPA, this is the factor that helps them stratify things from things. Now, not to be outdone, if you listen to only one podcast after tonight, it's a great data going deep dive. It's with the dean of admissions at Dartmouth going all into it. And they even said, even when they were test optional, they said we encourage you to submit scores regardless of how they might compare, because we really want them, because we want context. What if at your school the average is a 1110, but you have a 1300? Or 1500 or 1400, that still might be lower than the average, but you're literally 300 points higher than your peers. And that context matters. Back to that whole imperfect data, more data is better than less data. So if you're poking your eye out, it doesn't serve anyone good to have less context. Now, Yale, same thing, went back to test required, and their dean said it is the single best predictor of their performance at Yale. That's why they went back mandatory. Now, Brown. Now, to be clear, Brown is the last school on earth I would ever thought would go back mandatory. I asked my friend, like, isn't this crazy? He's like, no. He's like, Brown likes their hippies, but they like smart hippies. And that's his joke, not mine. It's a great joke. But yeah, so even Brown, the last school I would have thought politically would ever go back to mandatory, did, because their president, God bless her for being honest about it. She's like, yeah, we did the same research that Dartmouth and everybody else did. It's the single biggest predictor, because of course it is. Now, Cornell went back after being test blind. They hopped straight over test optional and went straight back to mandatory. Now, forget Ivies. Let's talk public schools. UT Austin also reneged and went back earlier than anticipated, back at last March. And so the reason is, it's a public university. Here's the data. Let's look at the slicing and dicing. Test optional applicants who got in there and went there earned a GPA of 0.86 lower than those who sent scores. Now, mind you, 2.5 means you're on probation. So like 8.86 is almost the entire range, and no one's getting 4.0, no one's getting 2.5. Like it's almost the entire range of what they have right there. That's why they had to go back, and people are failing out much more often, etc. And hot off the presses, all these people that I'm friends with that are maybe more anti-test, and they just don't say it to my face, but they're anti-test. They're like, oh my God, do you think UT Austin is committing suicide? Like they're going back to mandatory. Like what are they going to do? They literally went up in out-of-state applications 48% the year after they went back mandatory, because in 2025, no one doesn't not have scores. They might not submit them, but no one does not have scores. It's so silly. So there's no danger. Georgia went back. Florida never went optional. Like no one's having a problem finding applications. If anything, they're just exploding in those states that have. Now, this is what happened when I spoke at Clemson at that conference. After I gave a presentation, this guy found me in the hallway, and he said, I got this almost right. I wrote it down on my notepad right afterwards, after we finished chatting. He goes, man, your presentation was great. I'm like, oh, cool, where do you work? And he told me where he worked. And he goes, no, your presentation is great. I wish my boss had been here to hear this because you're so right. He goes, thing is, if there's some kid in South Georgia who has a good GPA and a 26 on the ACT where his school's average is a very unfortunate 16, I want to see those scores. I'm 1,000,000% I'm in that kid. He's earned the right to come here. What's that? 4 standard deviations above the rest of his high school? I lose that context when test optional is given. When the moms on Paying for College 101 say, oh, don't send it to school X unless it's a 29, no, that kid would then not send it and probably would not get in, and you would hurt his entire future. So I do some pro bono boot camps in South Georgia. I can tell you stories. This is exactly what I wished. And so I said to him, I said, can I quote you? And he goes, I have a mortgage, and that's the best response to that. I said, can I say where you work? He goes, you can say what athletic conference I'm in. So there's a guy who is one of the lieutenants, like not the top guy, but like one of the top two or three at a school in the ACC who greatly wishes that his boss would finally listen and go back to test mandatory. So we'll see what happens. But good guy, and he's so right on a million levels. That's exactly who I want. That's who with Auburn, for example, that 6.5%. Who's that mostly used for? Maybe their quarterback, but mostly for tax-paying Alabamian valedictorians in rural areas where they have a dirt floor schoolhouse with no textbooks, etc. That's who it should be used for, taxpayers, etc. Anyways, that's a whole different topic. Now, let's talk about, speaking of Auburn. Auburn, you know I like data by now, screenshots. So I paid my student $50. I said, all right, I'm going to pay you to be a paparazzi for 5 minutes of work. I'll give you $50. And they're like, I'm listening. So they took these pictures, and is it true? So have Auburn, Miami, Tennessee, a couple other schools gotten catastrophically harder to get into the last 5 years? Yes, they have. But if you send scores, do you get in at a 47% rate to Auburn? Yes. If you don't, is it 5 to 7%? I know this because in 8,000 students, will never have a student get in test optional to Auburn from out of state here in Georgia. So I planted my student and had the dad ask something, and the student recorded the voice memo. Hopefully this will come through in the PowerPoint recording tool here.
There was more in-state that was accepted test optional than out-of-state. I would say it was closer to 10% for in-state, probably closer to somewhere between 5 and 7% for out-of-state.
Okay, thank you.
So I admire the guy because the student told me he was nervous and not happy he was asked that question, but to his credit, he did answer it. So yes, out of state, 5 to 7%. So coin flip with scores below Ivy League admit rates without scores. So context. Now, the placement test gotcha. If you do no tutoring, please, for the love of everything, have your student at least sit for the real test, because Facebook erupts every summer with moms who are like, but you said test optional. And they get to campus, and because they were test optional, they have to take these placement tests. And if they don't do well enough on them, then they have to take remedial classes that don't even count for graduation, that delay graduation, that cost mom 5 figures of money and delay graduation. And that's not right. Like, that is why at least take the test cold, and if you're not going to study at all, because this happens all the time. Now, I love Indiana and their transparency. They say, yeah, the Kelley School of Business is the crown jewel that anybody applying from out of state, pretty much the end. Business. And the certainty of, if you have this GPA and this test score, let's go. Versus if you go there and then attempt to transfer in as upperclassmen, let's think back to that whole Mega Millions slide from before. Anything's possible, but pretty much no. And so that's why it's important for certain programs like this that are elite. Now, I'm in my giving back mode. I like to joke now that I have gray hair in my beard. It's time to start giving back. I'm very grateful because I quit JV tennis. And I used those hours from JV tennis to study for the SAT, ACT. It paid for all of college. I'll never make more money per hour than I did studying for the SAT and ACT in high school, no matter how successful our business ever is. And so I'm grateful. So I approach every bit of teaching I do from a place of gratitude. And so I spent money out of my own pocket this summer paying an intern to help us build this website, because we are living in a golden age of merit aid. If a student is willing to work and do the footwork and research the schools. So meritaidgrids.com, it's free. Always will be, and it's a living, breathing database that people keep submitting updated things to make the website even better. What it does, and it's been picked up by Yahoo Finance. I've been on national TV, local TV, radio. And people, with inflation and everything else, people like to save money, and so this is an important thing. So go to it, because there's hundreds of schools that have these grids that say, if you have a GPA of this and a test score of this, we promise you, Kohl's Cash style, this much money. And yes, Auburn requires some higher scores than Mizzou does, but it's real money. It's, the difference between a 28 at Auburn versus 29 is 28 grand. That's that one question. That's that first one question there is 28 grand, and then it keeps going up from there. And Mizzou, don't let anyone tell you that you have to have a 36 on the ACT in order to get money. With as little as a top 37% score, a 23, you can get up to 34 grand at Mizzou, and up to 84 grand with a top 12% score. That's awesome. So kids who can't get into the Grady School of Journalism here at UGA, because it's a really good one and UGA is really hard, saving 84 grand at one of the other top 10 university journalism programs in the nation, it takes the bite off that cost quite nicely. Now, meet Bradley Danielson. He's my son. I don't have a son. He's a fake email account that has been around for 14 years that I use to do mystery shopping and email colleges and different things. It's hard to get answers sometimes. So that's what we use. And so you look at this next page. Before we dive into the test optional data, do we send or not? It depends. Think of a field goal. So the 25th, 75th percentile is like the field goal. If you shank it wide right above the 75th, then yes, good job. You definitely send it. If you're anywhere in the field goal range, this is where some counselors disagree with me. No, because what it means is if 75% of the people that sent scores that got in did that, why would you not send something that's in that middle? It's in the field goal range. It's good. Now, what if it's just below it? It depends on the context. Look at the common data set. What percent of freshmen sent scores that enrolled? If you are 1 point lower than the average at Auburn, should you still send it? Obviously, because 93% of kids sent it. Pepperdine, who cares? Malibu, etc. So that context, that flavor, there is some hustle and some legwork involved to know where to send what and why. Now, the COVID anthem on every single test website or college website is test optional applicants shall not be disadvantaged. Like I said earlier, if that were actually true, I'd be living homeless under a bridge somewhere, because if you flip that, logically, doesn't that mean that test submitting applicants shall not be allowed to be advantaged? That's what it means. And as you saw, and as you're going to see in this next slide, let's talk about it. So did Bradley, my email address, email the top 200 colleges, or call the top 200 colleges in America and ask them, hey, what's your admit rate with kids who sent scores versus who didn't send scores? 150 of them did not reply at all. Of those who replied, most of the majority said we are not authorized to disclose that information. If you have to say not authorized to disclose, you've already told me a lot of helpful information anyways. But to their credit, 15 schools, just 15 out of all of them, sent their data. And this is back in 2021 when you couldn't find scores somewhere. Now here we're in 2025 where you can find test sites anywhere, right? And so you got in 120% to 270% as often when you sent scores. To be clear, if you take one extra AP class, can that triple your odds at Boston College? Absolutely not. And so the single biggest lever that you can change senior year is that one extra set of scores, because, oh yeah, you look at this, it's a real thing. Now, not to be outdone, for a long time, Boston College was the leader of the pack. Auburn came in and said, hold my beer, and they will never be dethroned as the biggest. It's called a submitter advantage. What percent do you get in over those who didn't send scores? 800%. They'll never be dethroned. Now, I tease, but it's a job. I love this Steve Ballmer clip where he's saying developers, holistic. If you go on a tour, it'd be fun. Do this as a prank. Go on a tour and ask the tour guide, just fib about your student's GPA, and be like, so my student has a 1.4, should they apply? And the person walking backwards on the tour might be like, well, you never know, holistic. It's silly. So the whole point that bothers me is you can say holistic, but then you look at some of the stuff I've shown you, like UCLA, like Purdue, like Auburn, like Bucknell. This just doesn't match. Or back to my biz dev intern, the law school applicant, it's not just undergrad. Look at this. Locally, here's UGA Law School. They published this data, and look at that Berlin Wall. That Berlin Wall that exists at a 167 on the LSAT, where pretty much if you have 4.0, but below that Berlin Wall, look at all those yellow dots, gray dots, red dots, etc., and vice versa. So the process doesn't end in high school; it ends never. Grad school, etc., still cares a lot. MCAT scores, GMAT scores, all of it. Now, the tipping point for our industry. I don't have to argue with parents about test optional anymore because last January happened. We're a year removed. If you've lost Jeff Shalingo, no fan of tests, you've lost. If you've lost Nate Silver, no fan of tests, you've lost. And if you've lost the New York freaking Times, you've lost. And so if you read only one article after this presentation, go type in the misguided war on the SAT. It's a just compendium of crazy. It's 15 pages long. It's a 10-minute read. But just, you'll see exactly why schools are going back if you read that. So things are more calm and honest these days. Now, and for the first time ever, this came out just recently in last month, where a majority of schools, at all schools, whether it be Podunk U or Harvard, a majority of all applications are now containing scores. And so that changed, obviously, after COVID for a little while, and then yes. Now, let's talk about the crab mentality. You're here, you're watching this. Hopefully your kid is watching this, or if not, you can convince them to later. It's very empowering. Maybe they watched it with you. One of our students sent us this image. It's from Wikipedia. They were learning this in AP Psych. It's a real thing. There's videos on YouTube called crab mentality. So crab mentality is crabs are not nice people. If there's crabs in a bucket about to go get eaten at a restaurant, and one of them tries to escape from the bucket, its friends will pull it back down and say, come die with us. Not nice friends, right? This is, in this analogy, your student. You can educate them that, yes, you studying and sending good test scores increases your odds of getting admitted, or can save good old mom or dad 5 or 6 figures of possible merit aid and maybe change mom's retirement date, which is also a good thing. So they're going to be lazy because your kids' friends are going to try to drag them down like the crab in this analogy. No, come die with us. Just be lazy. Didn't you hear they're test optional? Tell them no. And that's why you should show them, because the danger is students don't know. Changes your odds. It changes the final price tag of merit aid. It's very, very dangerous. So you got to educate them. Now, the winds have shifted, like I just showed you. All the New York Times, etc. articles Grades mean less, as you saw with the grade inflation stuff. SAT scores are predictive, not my opinion. Those raw quotes and all the podcasts from before. And also, honestly, test scores are better for equity than voluntourism trips to dig wells in Chile. So do that because it's a good thing to do to help the planet. But if your essay starts off with the line, when I was digging wells in Chile to help save these people, I tore my ACL, but I still worked really hard and rehabbed my leg, and I still got back and played soccer, yay. Like that, please don't. Like that is, that just shows you can pay for a trip to Chile. And so these scores, I studied. I did not have a tutor in high school. I went to Barnes & Noble, got this much of books, and I wailed away with a Matt Damon-esque like $1.50, Matt Damon from Good Will Hunting-esque $1.50 in library fines, to use that famous quote. Because if a kid's willing to work hard, what we do is not easy, but it's not hard. It's commas, it's rectangles, it's putting in the reps. We make it more efficient, but anybody, if you want to have faith in our country, go on reddit.com/r/ACT and look at those kids. They're almost all self-studiers, studying with a budget of 0 and getting crazy scores because passion matters more. I've never met a billionaire who got 36. If I was a billionaire, why would I care if I got 36? But Dad's a billionaire. And so it's so many strivers do amazing things, change their financial picture, change their merit aid by working hard on this stuff that is ultimately commas, rectangles, putting in the reps. And plus, if the application explosion just keeps getting worse every year as it has with the Common App, it just means they have to rely on numbers more because there's not any additional admissions officers coming to rally with the cavalry. Now, so what can you do? So if you can visit, real or virtual visits, please do. They track that demonstrated interest. I have a kid with a 36 on the ACT, top 5% grades. Didn't even get waitlisted, straight denied from Emory. He lives 4 miles from Emory. He never visited. They track that stuff. Of course they should. Did his mom make him apply just because? It showed, and they correctly rejected him. He would have never gone there in a million years. So yes, schools do track that. If you're offered hard classes and you can do it, take them. If you can shine with these scores, do it. And initiative, hustle. The kid who starts their shoe flipping business, or the person who does Eagle Scout or Girl Scout Gold Award, hustle during this era where kids are branded as being sometimes lazy, shows so much. My friend who used to work in Northwestern admissions, he did this motion. He goes, he's an Eagle Scout, I'm an Eagle Scout, and he goes, Brian, Eagle Scout was a big deal when we were in high school, but imagine in an era with TikTok, the initiative to finish a Eagle Scout project. And he goes, pew. And so I don't know if there's unofficial policy back when he was working at Northwestern, but it is a nice thing. So please put that on your resume if you have things that are similar, that show big achievements and hustle and initiative. Now, let's talk about how many hours you should study for this test. So it depends. If you only need 2 points, please study very little. If you need 12 points, it's all about the gap between your starting score and where you're trying to get to. No such thing as a good score or bad score. It's all about what score you need for the schools of interest. Now, what we do, coaches say give us 110%. I say give me 5%. If you play one sport for 4 years, that is 1,600 hours of your time. The kids who have the most emojis on score release day, when they send to me, typically study for literally 5% of that. They study like I did with tennis for 1/3 of one sport for one season. So if you doubt your kid's ability, there's never a chance that they'll ever be able to do well. If they put in 1/3 of the hours of a sport for one season, they will shock you with what they can accomplish. That's all it is. So just please work at it. It's just commas, rectangles, it's predictable stuff. It is not an IQ test. If it was an IQ test, then no one's scores would change or move up and we'd be out of business. It's again, commas, rectangles, reps. Now, David Graves, head of admissions at Georgia. I love this quote. When people say, oh my God, my kid's so busy, what should we do? Instead of dropping rigorous courses, maybe an activity could be dropped. Now, one of UGA's lieutenants that was speaking at a North Point college fair, I was the test prep guy on a panel at North Point Mall, and there was a UGA, like one of the other admissions officers, not David, there. And one parent asked this question, mic drop moment. You could hear a pin drop. He said, extracurriculars are just that, extra. Like once your entree, your 80% entree, your curricular is there, then things like I did, XYZ can matter, but keep that entree strong. You could have heard a pin drop. Now, UGA, I'm not from here. I'm from St. Louis originally. I have no dog in this fight, pun intended. But every year, the slow parade of stats getting higher can scare people. It'd be great if we could stop winning national championships and things. It's already getting hard, so that did not do any favors. But the thing is, why you shouldn't panic is you can look at the data and say, oh, wow, the average SAT score was 1419 for UGA for SAT. Am I screwed because my score is so low? Context. 1419 early, 1365 regular. Of those who actually matriculated and enrolled 1,350. They don't publish this last number, but it's a pretty good guess. Around 13. What if I go ask people in Athens and say, be honest, what's your best single day score? 1,300 probably. That doesn't mean you get to have a 1,300, but if your kid starts at an 1180 and says, I'm so far away, there's no chance. Yes, there is. Like you can take it again, you can super score. So if you took it 3 times, you can take your best reading score from one day and your best math score from another day. 95% of schools now super score, and that's why schools have such higher averages than they used to. UNC, their average went up 2 point something ACT points the very moment they started super scoring. So that is important. Now, UGA. This is awkward because the UGA URL got cut off here, but edisonprep.com/UGA. I'm not hurt. It doesn't hurt my feelings. It's kind of funny. This page is shared by guidance counselors at high schools nationwide because it's free college counseling for UGA. I should charge for it. I don't. It's a public service. But we've been tracking this data. If you type in UGA admission statistics, we're on the first page of Google. Because this page gets more clicks than every other page on our entire website combined because it's that good. So if you or anyone you care about is possibly looking at UGA, they'd be silly to not read this slowly and fully. Here's all the data going back 15 years, so now what? It just gives you strategy and some advice. Now, caring versus not caring. There's the half of America that does not care. But the half of America that does care about these tests is studying harder than ever, which is why we have to keep revising our materials every 6 months. I never print our book twice. This is our baby. Last week, didn't update this. We just printed version 2 of the digital SAT book after it just started. The digital SAT started in March of 2024. We were already in version 2. We'll be on version 3 by July, and it'll slow down eventually. But I keep saying that. We're on version 13 of our ACT book in the last 9 years because our students are our best spies. Pascal's triangle was never on the ACT until 18 months ago. It has been on a bunch of tests the last 18 months, so our students complain, and then we add it to our book. So it's a constant game of cat and mouse. You owe it to your student to not have them use a random book at Barnes & Noble. Any book not revised in the last 18 months is fine if you're trying to go from a bad score to an okay score, but that top tier, the first X points at the top are just gone because you're using outdated materials. So I don't enjoy spending 100 plus hours a year revising our stuff, but we have to. Now, our philosophy, why we're different, our small team, this should be updated, we are now 20. And we are now 165,000 hours of experience. And the thing is, our industry, if you tutor for 500 hours, you're a dinosaur because literally it's mostly college kids that tutor for a month or two before they realize not worth it, oh well, etc. And so our industry is a mess. We're small because I want to be able to manage quality control and I don't want to run a staffing agency. But why we grew is because parents found out test optional. There's the half of the moms in cubicles didn't believe test optional and half the moms that believed them, and now they didn't get in where they wanted, and they're studying so hard with the younger siblings. And so we grew because I got tired of telling people we can start in 7 months because our prices are reasonable and we're good at what we do. My wife and I are the 2 most experienced tutors in the entire Southeast United States, 75,000 hours plus of tutoring experience. When 500, literally pick a company we have more hours experience than all 200 of their college kids, these big agencies, and so it's silly. But the thing is, if we're full, please reach out to us. Or if you need in person, but you are in Omaha, I know people there. We are friends. We're in a professional group of tutors, and we are happy to refer you to someone if we can't personally help. And the thing is, we're also nerds. Have I gotten back to back? 36 is 4 in all. My wife always beats me on the SAT because she teaches our SAT classes, etc. But we're nerds. We don't walk the walk, we run the walk. Especially because a ton of our students come to us. I have a 1490, and I'm mad about it because that won't work for MIT. Because correct, 1490 won't even come close to working for. So you have to have people who are capable of actually getting a higher score than the people they're tutoring. You don't want to know what percent of America tutors with someone who actually could not get the score that they already have, and that's awkward, but that is why please ask us. I'm happy to give you not just SAT, ACT references, it can be college counselor references, or I need a CPA rec because I have a weird financial situation, or a French tutor. I don't speak French, but I know someone who does. So reach out. We're always happy to help, but it takes a village. Now, after all this stuff to have a test optional, my mom was freaking out. My mom said, oh my God, you have little babies. We had twins at the time. You have little babies and you bought a house and you have an office lease. What's going to happen? I'm like, Mom, calm down. So what I did was I had our whole team sign a copy of this and I gave it to my mom as a Christmas present. And this is a picture speaks 1,000 words. So yes, we've grown a lot, and that's our before and after picture. But the thing is, please ask hard questions. If we can't help you, please let us refer you because our industry, this is a great URL. It is what it is. But this URL, edisonprep.com/ourindustryisbroken. Go to it. There's a website called glassdoor.com where people can submit their pay at their jobs that they have. And literally, we pay our people 2, 3, 4 times what other places pay, because you can't get someone good to work for Chipotle wages. As little as $15 to $22 per hour, driving around to people's houses. In our office, they come here, and the sessions are our office or virtually or whatever. Like, we treat our people as professionals. And so our industry, again, giant mass. The bigger the company, the more likely it's college kids that are getting paid Chipotle. So that is why things happen the way they do. Now, we are pretty involved in the industry, so that's my wife and I. That's the CEO of the ACT in between us. So I'm one of the founding board. Our company is one of the founding board members of the NTPA, founding members, and I'm one of the board members on the NTPA, which is like IECA is for college counselors or NACAC is for admissions officers. So it's a professional organization, good governance group, nonprofit, and that staircase right there has millions of hours of tutoring experience on it, and that's my closest friends, and we all talk shop, and like sharpen knife sharp, like iron sharpens iron, the saying. So yes, we all talk shop, and we're not competitors, we're colleagues, and we make each other better. So that's important to have a full-time professional tutor if you can at all do so. Now, the ACT stole my book. The ACT stole my question. I didn't ask for royalties, but this was in our book, and our kids took it all these years, and then they walked in the test. It was my literal question. I got texts from students, hey, they stole your question. So yes, the answer is 720. That's why when I'm in the trenches taking the test each year, when we're writing our materials, we can anticipate, and hey, sometimes we get lucky and they literally use the question that we wrote because we were on the same wavelength. So got to use fresh, real materials. Now, how these tests differ. The PSAT precedes the SAT, the PreACT precedes the ACT. Take it every year that your student allows. Familiarity makes them less stressed. What if they're smart but a worrier? We have way more than our fair share of smart but worrier in our company, so please get them familiar, etc. Now, I will tell you, not being mean, just shooting straight facts, the majority, if not 98% of all the money spent on PSAT preparation is unethically spent by tutoring companies that scare you into thinking the PSAT matters. Full stop. Unless your student has a 1300 cold on the PSAT, in case hell is real, I need to make sure you do not spend money worrying about the PSAT. I track data incessantly. In all these years, have we had just one kid who had one kid had 1280, and he worked all summer on it like crazy. But literally, if you're not higher than 1300, in some states, because the cutoffs vary by state, you can miss as few as one question and still get national merit semifinalists. Some states, West Virginia, etc., you can miss maybe five or seven questions. The whole point is it's so sensitive that if you're not starting off that high, don't worry about it. Too much stress is put on parents thinking the PSAT matters. It's great for familiarity. Yes, the top 15,000, 16,000 kids in America get semifinalists, but other than that, it's not a huge deal. Focus on the SAT and the ACT. That's where the majority of merit aid money is always going to come from, and you can retake it, whereas the PSAT is an oops, one-shot deal. Now, it's important to know it can feel like a conspiracy that, oh, all my friends, it seems like their highest scores on English are English and reading, and their lowest is math and science. That's because it's true. It's the ACT's test. They can do whatever they want. So they philosophically, even since I was in high school, they simply give out 200, 300, 400% more good scores on English and reading than math and science. That doesn't mean give up on math. It means get greedy on English. It's easier to get a 36 on English than a 30 on math. It really is, all the time. So if you don't put the reps in, like we see people sometimes who are good at grammar, do 3 or 4 English sections and get a 33 plus. Math, we're talking a dozen or 2 tests minimum to get up that range, so that's important. Now, one thing that I didn't mention earlier, I'll mention now, is how is this test different than when we were in high school? The ACT specifically used to be criminally easy, intellectually, so sad, it was so easy, but the curve was brutal. You couldn't even get a 35 on math. -1, 34. And so what's happened these last 15 years, every test, they just keep making it intellectually harder, but the curve is also getting very liberal. ESPN has 30 for 30. You can miss 30, and so does the ACT. You can miss 30 questions on every ACT I own, and you still can get a 30. So if your student's smart but careless, or smart but a worrier, and you can tell them, listen, honey, you can miss 30 questions and still start with a 3 and get a top 6.5% score, and they'll be like, no way. Because if you miss 30 questions on a test at school, you are getting a call from the teacher, not in a good way. So it's such a different thing. The test is getting harder, so from a compassion standpoint, let them know that. You can miss more. Now, I love the Taco Bell slide because really, I gave away a preview. The thing is, Taco Bell, every single item at Taco Bell is the same ingredients, just put together in different proportions and styles. Same thing. Both tests have grammar and reading and math. The difference is the ACT is speedier, but intellectually more straightforward. The SAT gives you, it's abstract. It is fancy. Charles Dickens and fancy stuff and vocab to the moon, poetry analysis, but it's crazy timing. You get so much time per question, but if you didn't need it, if you could almost finish the ACT before practicing, then yeah, you're probably an ACT kid. If you didn't even get to half the questions on the ACT, you're probably an SAT kid. Timing is the tail that wags the dog. And like I said for the ACT, not for the SAT, for the ACT, 40 questions wrong can be a top 7% score. Minus 10 can sometimes still be perfect. If you miss 10 questions in the SAT, you're losing 100-something points. So it's a different curve. This is the curve. I did not graduate in 2009, 2000. But even just in a decade, 2009, look at this. The same number of wrong questions. English, back in 2009, 69 questions is a 30. These days, often a 35, sometimes a 34. You're just allowed, it's a big butt kicking. You're allowed to get so many more wrong, which is a very ethical way to do it. Let's make it crazy hard, but have a very gracious curve. It helps tease things out so it's not based on who had a couple good guesses or not. Very ethical. Now, here's the slide I love. The SAT is like reading The Economist, but a mall walking pace. Whereas the ACT is like reading Newsweek, but you better be jogging. And so you know where your kid falls down on that range. Now, my daughters, this is them, they love our calculators. So I get calls all the time. My 6th grader at Johns Creek Elementary, click, go away. So I will not tutor them. Sorry, it's not time. Your freshman and sophomore year, one thing matters. Getting as ridiculously high of a GPA as humanly possible. The end. That's it. So now, should you? What's happening right now? I'm recording this on January 12th, and what's happening? Yes, all the Eager Beaver, Hunger Games, District 1, Alpha sophomores who are in Algebra 2 or above as sophomores are getting RSVP'd for mocks in the next 2 months or so that they can make their summer plans to practice. The changing of the guard happens every year, Memorial Day. We go from being 95% juniors to being 95% juniors. Because in general, if sophomore year is over and junior year is not, it's the right time to be taking the test. Any well-built tutoring plan should be trying to give you a very, very high likelihood of being done by the June test of junior year at the absolute latest. Ethically, I will never intentionally build a plan that has a student taking the test senior year. It's like extending your taxes, it's stressful, etc. You're playing a sport and fall sports and admissions essays and applications and like anything possible. But we rarely, if ever, see someone knock out of the park senior year on the SAT. ACT is very stressful, so don't. So now one exception, if your student is in Algebra 2 as a sophomore, as soon as sophomore year ends, game on, let's go. We'll practice, like every kid I'm starting with this June 1st is a sophomore who just finished Algebra 2. On the other hand, ethically, if your kid is not starting Algebra 2 until junior year, moms are mostly the ones who watch this presentation, so the analogy I use is it's like inducing labor at 19 weeks. Your kid will be okay, but not if we do that right now. Now is not the time. We got to let the baby grow for a little longer, and we got to get to at least mid-October, take a mock test, and then really start studying after New Year's. Pretty much every kid. So we started working with 310 new people between the first of the year and the 19th of January. Pretty much all of them are kids I made ethically hurry up and wait because they were in Algebra 2 as juniors. So the right time is second semester if you're Algebra 2. So that's a lot of detail on that, but that is the decision matrix for when and how to study is based purely on that. Now, the changes are coming to the ACT. You might have heard that. It's shorter, slightly. Science is optional, maybe. More on that in a second. And we have blog posts all the time. As we see more data being released on the new ACT, if you're a junior in the class of 2026, nothing changes because, again, ethically, everyone should be done by the June test, or if not that, the July test. And the paper test of the new format does not debut until September of 2025. I'm not even going to start writing the new book for our company until mid-May during AP exams when no one wants tutoring anyways for SAT, ACT. So yeah, that's all I'll do it. It's fine. It's not a big deal. I'm not scared because the content's not changing. Just the timing and a couple of the strategies are changing. They're going from football to arena football on the new test. They're going from 215 questions to 177 questions. So in the arena football analogy, a lot of the same rules, slightly smaller field, but the content is the same. I'm not too worried. But yes, largely speaking, unless there's some rock star kid in the 2027 class who's so close to being done, he just kills it off in July, okay, fine. But otherwise, 90+% of the class of 2027 will be taking the new format ACT. Now, this is a very busy chart. There's a high-res version of it at edisonprep.com/mocks where we have our free list of all the mocks. So it just says, based on my year and what math I'm in, when and what should I do and why. So it's a very helpful flow chart that you can look at when determining when to do mocks. Now, The digital test for the SAT started last March. If you've ever taken a test or a quiz at work, or the GRE on a computer, all those things, it's very similar. They just put it on a computer and you click radio buttons instead of bubbling in an answer. So very similar content. The difference is, you might have heard that it is adaptive. It's kind of adaptive. Think of Willy Wonka, where that one girl steps on the scale in that Willy Wonka movie, and it goes yes, no, like good, bad. That's essentially what happens. So it's not like it's Star Trek, where the test adapts like some AI hive mind after each question. It's section adaptive. You do the first half of reading. If you do well enough, then you get to go up. And if you do not well enough, Willy Wonka analogy, and you go to the lower module, and that caps how high you can possibly get to. Same thing with math. So is all of America basically just taking one of 4 tests? It's not that adaptive. So either you got high module, low, high, or high, low. And so people act like it's Star Trek. It is adaptive, but it's not that much. It's just 2 decision points in the entire test, basically. And there's a lot of vocab. They've amped up vocab. They have some poetry. They've added some hard stuff on the reading. Now, the initial postmortem, here we are, 8 months into it. It's adaptive, kind of. Calculator used for everything. More time per question, lots more time per question. And the first time in America, kids can now have a different weight assigned to each question. So they don't know how much is assigned to each question. Do the best you can. You have no clue. It's a black box. But yes, not all questions are weighted equally. ACT, they are. Old SAT, they were. Now, if your kid is watching this and they're the kind of eager beaver robotics team captain that wants to go do tests right now, even though it's too early, the only time you'll hear me say, please go use Kaplan test is right now. Because I want you saving the sacred. There are only 6 real tests that exist on planet Earth. And when these kids come to me, I love hustle, but heartbreak when they come to me, oh, I already did every single test on Earth. No, now I have to use fake tests with you, and it really hurts your score. So keep them away from real tests, period, until after sophomore year is over, period. Now, because the SAT has gone from 154 questions to 90, it's increased volatility. So volatility is the name of the game. Most kids should plan on taking the test 3 or 4 times. ACT, plan on taking it 2 or 3 times. Taking it once is what happened when all of us were in high school. But today, once is fine if you do it. 1 time is weird. 7 times is weird. 2, 3, 4 times. The national average kid in suburbia takes it 3 times. So, and ideally with momentum, taking it consecutively back to back is the goal. Now, the easiest ones on the SAT are insultingly easier. The 10 hardest, much harder. I'll be honest, when a kid brings me a new ACT packet, because you can buy a copy 3 times a year of the ACT, they release it, reading upside down, I can look at the problem and I can figure out the answer before the kid even realizes I've never seen that problem. On the new SAT, it was very humbling for me. I'm a nerd. I was good at these tests in high school. I'm good at them now. Still, I'm like, you know what? Why don't you go grab a cup of coffee and let me look at this for a second? Yeah, like the 2 hardest are really, really hard. Really, really, really hard. And that's a big difference from before. I never had to do that on the old SAT. Now, if you stand, like I said earlier, no chance of finishing a substantial portion, say 90 plus questions, 80 plus questions in the first one, SAT is probably your home. Now, let's talk about what's happening, the changes. You're going to hear some hot takes randomly from blog posts and things that the new ACT is starting right now. It is not true. It is not true. It is not true. The new ACT is not starting until September of 2025, and don't let anyone let you believe otherwise, because what they're doing is at select test sites, nowhere near my office in Atlanta, because most high schools got the memo, no, we're doing paper, we're not doing the guinea pig test. They are debuting a pilot of the new format in April, June, and July of 2025. Who wants their kid to be a guinea pig when there's merit aid and admission on the line? No. Tell your enemies to take the test, the digital ACT, these next few months. No. If you love your child, paper now, paper always. There's a tutor group survey of all the people in my friend group, essentially, professional full-time tutors, and it was almost unanimous. And we don't agree on it. Tutors are feisty. We don't agree on anything, and pretty much everyone has said no. If you love your kid, you take paper. Being able to write on the actual test booklet for the math problems and the science graphs is a huge freaking deal. So paper now, paper next year, paper always. Now, we already covered most of the stuff in this slide because it's covered in both the changes and the new SAT, etc. But how they're changing the test, they released some data, is mostly going to be achieved by deleting some of the easiest ones because it makes you feel good. But if everyone gets it right, does it help stratify the kids' scores out at all? It doesn't. And the CEO of the ACT has said to us multiple times in multiple forums that they seek to be a source of stability in a time of change, where they are offering the paper and digital with no plans to get rid of the paper ever. A lot of rural school districts would fire them if they did. It's really important for their contracts. Like, they like paper. I like paper. Tutors like paper. Kids should like paper on the ACT. Now, I was 1 hour into a Disney World vacation with my daughters when my phone was blowing up 300 texts in 2 hours. I'm not that popular. And so it was parents, because the ACT announced their changes when I was at Disney World. And I was like, oh crap. And so what happened? Nothing happened. I read the blog post and I went back to my business. I went on GoDaddy.com while I was sitting in the line at the Haunted Mansion in the Magic Kingdom, and I registered isscienceoptional.com, which is now fully launched. I had the same email address I always use to mystery shop and do things. I had my intern email the top 200 colleges in America saying, are you going to use the optional, because they're making, that's the one change I didn't mention explicitly, it was on the other slide, they're making the science optional. Hold on. The ACT is making the science optional. Will colleges still want it? The majority of them, at least so far, yes, but let's trust but verify. So when we emailed all of them, some of them are still deciding, and the image will become clear later this spring. But other than Babson is very angry and hates science apparently, but other than Babson, very few people gave hard no's. They either said we're deciding or recommended, or some engineering schools didn't even answer the question. They replied, we're an engineering school. That's the most dismissive and condescending thing ever. So yes, the more STEMmy, the more numbery, going back to the whole test optional thing, the more likely that it is going to be, and the more elite, the more likely that it is going to be mandatory. In the Bright Future Scholarship in Florida, already said it's mandatory, etc. So there's a blog post all about science optional and the ACT changes, 3 of them, if you go to edisonprep.com/blog. Now, did you hear that one of the most popular shows on Netflix is about the digital ACT actually? So this is I crap myself up. My wife thinks I'm silly. But yes, nobody wants this. Nobody wants the digital ACT. Again, recommend to your enemies. Glitches, the lag going between the questions, not writing on math and science questions, Chromebooks, teeny sad, small screens, underpowered, etc., Wi-Fi issues. And I taught a boot camp. Breaks my freaking heart that I taught a boot camp, all these awesome kids in just south of Atlanta, and then after the test was over, it didn't upload because they had some IT security settings or something on the school's Wi-Fi, and none of them got their scores. And it was too late for certain deadlines for some seniors, and it really had a 7-figure impact possibly on merit aid. So it's a real big difference. Again, no digital, no ever. Now, if your kid is a part of a school district like Fulton County, my home county, that does it digitally, okay, fine. They do it on a Tuesday and it counts. It's super scoreable. Beggars can't be choosers, so deal with it. But if on the national test on the weekend, you always choose paper. Now, let's talk about this right here. So it's why it's important. If it's not clear, the reason why things are changing. So nothing's changing, period. For the digital SAT, 26, 27, both classes are fine. But it is the case. Why is science still going to be mandatory at most schools? Because most competitive applicants are done, if not already, long before the new test starts in September. And so that's why, since they'll have that data anyways, it's there. Great, we can use it. Things might change for the class 2027. Now, as far as eager alphas, because same thing as the SAT, are they only going to have probably 5 ACTs when they first start? Do not let your child, who's a 2027, gobble up the only 5 real new format ACTs. We're going to have to intersperse old content with new content until there's a lot more stuff out there. Now, why take mocks early? One of our students at Milton said, please use me as an example. Don't be dumb like me. He's not dumb. He's awesome. He's a great kid, model human being, funny, hardworking. Thing is, this guy, he's more of a cross-country kid than a football kid, and by that I mean he's probably 120 pounds, and I worry he's going to get injured playing football. And so his coach bullied him in football into not taking the test August through December because, oh yeah, football, we have film we're watching on the morning after or whatever. So he didn't do it the fall. Then March SAT, governor's honors interviews. May SAT, he had 4 APs. It's in the middle of AP exams. And in June test, he was already gone as a camp counselor. The test was offered 7 times a year. Even if you're a pre-planner who takes the mocks in sophomore year, you might be glad you did, because by the time you have Uncle Bobby's wedding and this and that, and the state swim meet's always on the same date as the February ACT, like you might only have 2 or 3 test days left, and the average kid takes it 2 or 3 times. So if I were a high school principal, in my utopia, I'd just have everyone last 2 days of the school year take a full-length SAT and ACT, and the amount of parental stress that would be reduced would be amazing. Now, there's one exception. If your kid it needs it for dual enrollment, like so many kids often do, or you have a coach who's bearing down on you and needs scores early, those are the only sophomores that we tutor. Or if there's a kid at North Springs who's part of the math magnet and ends up getting, I'm in Calc AB as a freshman, weird, but okay, fine. You've earned the right to prep if you're that far ahead in math. So ahead in math, sports, or dual enrollment are the only real reasons you want to start studying early. Now, or the thing is, if you're being recruited, please ask the coach what you need. It's not dirty to say, what do I need? You're not saying, give me extra. Believe me, they already know exactly how much pull they have or don't have. I see NCAA illegal emails on kids' phones all the time that say, here's the deal, make it a 26 and we're golden. Thanks, Bob. And so, yes, they might have a very different score goal if that is your student who's being recruited than you think. Now, my college counselor friend Jen Henry is amazing. So if you type in the right path, Jen Henry, this will pop up one of the blog posts. It went viral, like 400,000 hits across America. It went all the mom Facebook groups. And so this is not your mother's admit rates. This is definitely different. So things are the Southeast is getting popular. The Northeast is not. And so all the application explosions are happening primarily in the Southeast, as you're seeing. So I blame TikTok, football stuff, etc. The weather's not bad, etc. So this is where you need to update your mental model of what schools were what. Did Tennessee admit as high as 91% of their admits when we started the company? Yeah, they did. And this year was 22%, the out-of-state rate, 34% overall. Yes. So things have changed. Now, UGA, a very important note on UGA. We are a majority ACT company, not because it's a better test, but because a lot of people like UGA. UGA has a policy that says we only use English and math. We throw away reading and science 100%. This has been the policy for over 15 years, but parents and guidance counselors still don't always know it. So yes, is the route to Athens getting a ridiculous English score and a classy enough math score? Because again, English is super easy, math is super hard. So yes, that is good to know. Tell your friend who's totally unaware of this policy, who has a kid looking at UGA. I guarantee they probably don't know. Now, I had two kids from Marist who took mocks. They're friends, their moms are friends, and they thought that I was silly or wrong or drunk or something because they both got, can't make this stuff up, they both got 27 and a 1260, which at the macro level is the same. But kid A, had a 730 reading on the SAT, 530 math. Oh my goodness, this kid is taking the SAT, because how much you read outside of school the first X years of your life determines a lot about your reading cap, how far you can get, because the love of reading and the fanciness and the skill level and the vocab and everything is hard to do on a dime, whereas math is more reasonable. So that kid, SAT all the way. His buddy, remember I told you ACT English is the most insultingly easy chapter to move ever, or section to move on either test? Yes. So somehow for him, not. So yes, he's ACT all the way. We design 3,000 custom plans like this. So yes, you look at the overall score, but I never tell a kid you're tied, because once you look at the nuance of the section scores, almost everyone is a pretty clear winner on these tests. Now, it's important to know the two most difficult sections are SAT reading and ACT math. Therefore, if one of your kids' highest mock test scores is on those two, that means that's probably their test. I tutored my friend's kid. He's a full-time tutor, and it'd be too hard to tutor his own son because they both have very large egos and anger and tempers and things. So I tutored his son, who was like math boy, like robotics team captain, computer science, etc. He informed me that we weren't going to be working on the math section. I told him, what do you mean? I said, what makes you think you can tell me that we're not working the math section? The math section is the hardest section of all. He goes, because I'm the client. That is the rudest thing a student's ever said to me. So his funeral, I've always told kids for all these years that literally it is easier to get 36 on any section than even a 30 on math. What do you know? I obliged. And look what he got, 36, 36, 36, and a 30 in math. Now, if your whole identity is, I am math boy, it broke his heart. Now, at 35, he's a senior at Tech, he's fine. But at 35 would be fine, but he was angry. And over winter break, he just did a ton of tests and got a 35 in math too, just because. Still not a 36, but anyways, the whole point is math is the devil. The other ones aren't that bad, but the section scores tell the story of this stuff. Now, one thing that's unfortunate about the new SAT, this is a very quid pro quo generation. Mom, hope and prayer is not a method. But so what is motivating is if I can show a kid the first day of class, the ACT releases their tests, and you can say, hey, Bradley, you're getting 57 right. Can you fix 10 of them, and you'll go from a 25 to a 32, and mom will leave you alone, and you can be done? That's motivating. When kids can see the end zone, they work so hard it's not funny. Now, because the SAT is adaptive, et cetera, they are no longer ever going to release those tests. That is a negative, and there's the number of tests that are released is going to always stay much tinier. My partners and I, it's not public yet, we're about to release in about a month, built a platform called Assessive, where we had to do the College Board's job for them. It has all these extra tests and extra drills to make up for the lack of equivalent tests. So that's more on that later. It's coming next month in February 2025. Now, this year, my realtor, I wish that the AJC newspaper would publish articles like this, because my realtor, good for her daughter, she was lobbing Hail Marys where this one school she was looking at the time, they didn't super score, now they do. And if she got a 33 on a single day, 88 grand, no questions asked. And so she registration fee of like $48 or whatever, and so she got some good return on that investment. Good for her. Because again, it can save 5-6 figures. Now, parents, I need to be partners. So here we are, the first week of January, and all the kids, what do? 90% of our kids we tutor start off the group or only do the group, but 90% of our company's time is spent doing follow-up fine-tuning tutoring with kids who already built the foundation via the group. So that means this first week of the year, what are we doing? Meeting with kids who took the class for the December test, and too often I open the first page of the book, which in theory, that means every single problem should be done already. And this is the face I see right here. So trust but verify. The most profitable 2 minutes of your week as a parent is checking in on homework completion. We post it publicly on our website because kids are busy and kids will not do the homework. I wish I lived in South Korea or in Long Island, where we always joke, in Long Island, they're not better kids, they're just scarier parents. And so homework happens more often in certain high intensity areas of the country, but check in with you'll get done faster, it'll be more painless for everybody if homework happens sooner, rip it off like a Band-Aid, etc. Because, or put differently, if Schwab put a button called click here once a day for $1,000, wouldn't it be a pretty popular button? Yes, it would. Now, to kids who are watching this video with their parents, I love FaceTiming parents, you've been warned. This is the non-cuss word version. A very Bible churchy lady who does not cuss typically cussed because of this. Her kid and his best friend carpooled together, and one cared a lot, asked for extra tests, did all the homework, went up 9.5 points from the group. That's not a normal thing at all. Do not expect that. But 0.5, also not normal. He just didn't care that much. He skipped one class because it was he and his girlfriend's 3-month anniversary, which is not a thing. Anyways, so the mom called because clearly it works for some people, worked for the other guy. Why did my son only get 0.5? I said, well, how'd the homework go? And she says, well, he said he did it. I'm like, but did you look at it? She's like, no, why? And she's like, why are you FaceTiming me? And so I FaceTimed her, and this is the non-cuss word version we recorded, where she just goes through, and she's just flipping through, and she went from church lady to South Park bus driver in like 5 seconds, where she's like, but there's nothing. This is so disrespectful. And so she was, animated. So the whole point is check your students' homework, and you will get done faster. Everybody's better for it. Now, let's go ahead and talk about, I'm an extrovert, if you can't tell. And so when we first went in a heartbeat, went virtual like everyone did during COVID, I was scared. Like, are our results going to be the same? Our results got 20% better. Everyone in my industry was dumb. We all use dry erase markers, and we all feel so silly now. Why? So now we use a smartboard, and we can annotate the book that my wife and I wrote plus real tests. We can annotate on the smartboard that we also need to annotate on PDFs on the Zoom screen. So no more white. I don't own any dry erase markers anymore, and we can get through 20% more content by using a smartboard instead of that. So the industry transformed, not just me, all of us, because of smartboards for laptops versus dry erase. Now, it's helpful if you can tell us the plan for your goals, like where you're trying to apply. Please do not take both tests. It's better to measure twice, cut once. It better be varsity in one sport than JV in two. No college requires both tests, so please just take your stronger test after figuring out which one is better. Now, look at this. Please tell us your goals, because first of all, if someone studies and goes from a 22 to a 27, that's a big deal. That's going from top 43% to top 13%. That's literally 300% more rare as where you started. But if you didn't tell us, I wanted UGA, 27 is not going to work for UGA. Versus, it's cut off there. It says my top choice is LSU. So my joke is the day of 27 does not work for LSU. I'm stocking up on beef jerky and ammunition because yes, so there's just different standards, different schools, etc. So tell us as much as you can about your goals when we start, and we can not overdo it, not underdo it, just nail it. Now, we are always innovating. I talk fast if you can't tell. And so the test keeps getting harder. It's a cruel joke. And so I have the same amount of time to teach, but there's more stuff. So we have to innovate. So we built a calculator channel. All of our students get the TI-84 and the Desmos calculator channel. TI-84 is for the ACT, and Desmos and TA84 is for the SAT. It's an on-screen calculator they have, because kids, if they get good at their calculator, they can gift themselves an extra 5 minutes and an extra X points on the test. So that's included with everybody. It's like 2 hours of really helpful video. Helps their GPA too, because your kids use the same calculator in school but aren't taught how to leverage and use it pretty much. And we have other stuff too. We have a formula box lock screen to make them memorize the most important stuff for geometry, and we built a tool on our website where a kid can enter their homework answers and it spits out a beautiful PDF instantly to you, mom, plus me, plus them. It's awesome. So if they do the hard work, they can get these awesome reports right back if they want. Now, the right preparation, I put this in here twice because it is that important. Timeline's everything. If you're in Algebra 2 as a sophomore, take it after sophomore year is over, whenever. Let's go. Geometry is a sophomore, Algebra 2 junior, second semester is when you do things. Now, creating a smart test date plan. What if you're watching this? You love this presentation. Your spouse is kind of interested, but not really. So my best friend is a graphic designer, made me a beautiful, great Christmas present. They distilled some highlights from our presentation into like a 9-page PDF. It's cut off here, edisonprep.com/sophomore. It just de-stresses the process. You can read that as a recap of some important things like what should my sophomore year be doing this year to avoid stress junior year. Now, use real tests. So look at these 4. Use real tests, because literally these are all from within the same time span. And so, this is not new. Kids on Reddit have, share these publicly. Anybody with internet connection, these are there sitting around on the internet. And so students always say, it felt like cheating. Like it was like almost the same problem. Yes, there's only so many ways to ask a problem. And so here we are. And that's it. So use real tests. If you have already bought other test booklets from Kaplan or ARCO or REA or Prison Review, I'm not saying throw them away. I am saying give them to Goodwill, because you want to use real tests only. Now, risky test advice. Many counselors may say, just take it cold. It's February and March of junior year. Terrible test advice, because by the time those scores come back, not just us, any tutor worth their salt is full, and you're already almost done with the whole year, and now early action deadlines are bearing down, and it's really, really, really stressful. So the rule that most good tutors use is, I'm easy breezy, I tutor year round, so I don't care when you prep, as long as your first prepared for test is on the February ACT or the March SAT by the absolute latest, I'm easy breezy. In my utopia, to use ACT as an example, what about a fifth of kids each take the test July, September, October, December, February, like Neapolitan ice cream, 1/5 each, based on what they're doing in school, what activities they have, what sport they have. That'd be great, especially, and then take it consecutively. So don't think of yourself as a September ACT kid. I'm a September-October ACT kid. Take it twice, back to back. And the reason why you also don't take it cold, if you go up too much. I had a girl, we have kids get these letters all the time. A kid doesn't try that hard. She was doing Dunwoody dual enrollment, tried just enough to get the score she needed for Dunwoody dual enrollment, and then studied and got a good score and was accused of cheating. And she was very offended. And so she had to take a day off school and drive to this place to go take the test, a validation test, a cheater test, in a room with other accused cheaters. And she got her score, it's fine. But yes, taking the test cold, blindly, the real test, is silly. You pollute your record and you waste money and you have to wait a long time to get it. Our mocks go to nobody but you. You get them back in a day, not a month, and then don't pay $50 or whatever. So yeah, for a million reasons, don't take the real test as mocks. There's no need. It can hurt you, as you see right here. Now, if your kid is watching this with you, book smarts meet street smarts. I will tell you, whenever I inherit someone as a tutoring student who has done extensive tutoring elsewhere, and their math score went down a bunch, it's not a college kid. The worst ACT math tutors are actually high school and middle school math teachers. And it's not personal. It's like being a priest by day and a rabbi by night. It makes no sense, because in school, they tell you, can't use your calculator, show all your work, or no credit. Let's be all abstract and theoretical and take forever. I say, let's use your calculator, pick numbers, plug and chug, no guessing penalties, show your work, don't show your work, run as fast as you can, because kids can't finish. And so it's book smarts meets street smarts that gets you a good score on the SAT and ACT. So kids who are goody two-shoes have to unlearn their habits. So look at SOHCAHTOA down here. Sine has an H in the denominator. Cosine has an H in the denominator. If your kid is looking at you right now, sitting next to you on the couch while watching this, then they're nodding. They already saw where the answer is here. So if H is 26, because it is, look at it, then wouldn't the cosine, the denominator of the cosine, also be the same 26, because H equals H? How many answers even have a 26 in the denominator? Just one. That's the street smarts. Your math teacher would not approve anyway of me doing that right there, but that is the right way to do it if speed matters and all that matters is getting it right. Now, optimal preparation. As I said, no one diets 3 years for their wedding, so you study, 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 and then take it at the peak of your momentum. And again, back-to-back consecutive tests is the way. Now, the golden rule, like we said, get done by junior year, not because I say so, but because of rolling admissions. Hundreds of schools have rolling admissions where as soon as you apply, they can admit you. And sometimes when they give out merit aid money, it's a lot easier to be generous when you have a lot of merit aid money left to give than when you're at table scraps at the end. Plus, some of them have early housing deadlines and early action deadlines and merit deadlines. You'll love yourself so much if you can get done by the June test, ideally, of junior year. Now, you want to get the right calculator. The right calculator is so important. So the tool for the job is an 83 or 84 calculator. If you don't have one, get an 84 plus CE. It's worth the extra $10. It probably says Python in the title. That's fine. But 84 plus CE, any flavor of that is the best. You'll use it all during high school, all during college. It's the best. If you have a TI 36, I'm sorry, get the right calculator. You can even buy one used. Moms go on the Nextdoor app. You love that app. And so you can type in looking for a used TI 84. I have clients all the time get a used 84 for like $30, $40. So great. And if you have a TI Nspire, we like to joke that TI Nspire inspires low scores. If Satan designed an operating system, it would be the TI Nspire. But on top of that, to add insult to injury, the Nspire CAS model is actually physically illegal on the ACT anyways. Good for the ACT for saying no because it's a bad calculator. 83, 84 is where it's at. Now, why it matters, look at this. This is problem 54, which to be clear, there's 60 questions. That means, is this supposed to be the 6th hardest question? If your kid knows how to use their calculator, this is one of the videos from our calculator video channel. So on that question, you mean I could just type it straight into the calculator and graph it? And look at the bottom. There's a hole from 1 to 3. Now look at the bottom left-hand corner. There's a hole from 1 to 3. Again, would your math teacher at high school approve of this? No, they would not. But that is where it's at. It's book smarts meets street smarts. The parent's role in optimal prep, obviously, student motivation is number 1, you are number 2. If your student is really good at video games, then guess what? They are going to have a higher score on the ACT cold than they should because the same mentality of that rapid reprioritization where, dang it, I have 100 things I need to do. I can only do one thing at once. What should I do? All of that feeds into that same mindset. It helps. So it doesn't help your GPA. It might help your ACT score. Be supportive, check in, homework completion, etc., and wait. Please don't send your scores, ever. They're going to offer you a chance to send it for free. Wait. Because what if you take it 3 times and all your best stats are on that 3rd time? Why would you want to send dirty laundry? Makes no sense. Wait until August, right before senior year, when you know your final list, and send just the scores that are needed for your best super score. Now, as I mentioned, these scores are just one part of the puzzle, so it's all for nothing if you get a 35 but have a bunch of C minuses. So whether it be college counseling, subject tutoring, executive functioning study skills people, anything, we're happy to just reach out to us. We're happy to be giving and connect you with the right people because it takes a village. Now, what we do, so SAT and ACT, we do classes, we do individual, and some kids do both. And then we also do AP history boot camps. That should be changed. It's actually April 26th. And 27th of 2025, we do 1 weekend a year. We do an awesome boot camp that my best friend from childhood teaches. He's a walking Alex Trebek, and so is his wife who does AP World. And it's been a 15-year tradition of doing AP boot camps because AP history credits are very valuable. And history in college is a lot harder than history in high school, just so you know. Now, the 3 styles of our tutoring. It's roughly 10% do private and roughly 30% do just the class. But 60%, a majority, do hybrid, which is let's build the foundation inexpensively via the class, paranoid, kitchen sink approach, and then do a much laser-focused, targeted fine-tuning, much smaller amount of it before the second test. So in a perfect world, everyone would do hybrid. All that said, if you just prefer private or you have a crazy schedule logistically, we will happily accommodate anything people want. Homework is key under all 3 routes. Now the thing is, my goal, I get paid to help scores go up and to teach kids to be confident, learn math, learn grammar, etc. They'll help them write papers and do math stuff in college. But my ego is fed by the fact that every time we teach a group class, I get an email like this the first day of class, guaranteed, if not multiple, where people come to class, their mom's expecting them to hate it. And I don't perceive myself as irreverent, but that is a word used sometimes. We have to make it interesting and fun and motivating because these kids don't want to be there. And so group classes get a bad rap because they're often taught by a random college freshman. So 8% of the entire testers in Georgia took my ACT class, of the ACT testers took my ACT class, not our company, my ACT class, because that's where almost everyone starts. School districts hire us to teach the class because this is my philosophy and my wife's philosophy, is that in order to motivate you, got, yes, teacher, but also part stand-up comic, but also part Tony Robbins motivation, because if you can't motivate them why to care, aka understanding the test optional data I showed you, then why are they going to care? And making it fun and funny and engaging is key. So our secret sauce is, you can look up on Wikipedia how many degrees are there in a triangle. It'll tell you. Like the stuff we teach is not secret. We make it more efficient, more fun, talk in analogies to make stuff stick better. That is part and parcel of the process. And we have a bunch of, if you're curious, we have a bunch of slides at edisonprep.com/results with stats and other happy people. So you can check that out if you want to. Now, some free resources. Our blog is amazing. Under the resources navigation tab, there's so many cool things that are free on our website. Check that out as well. You can follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, etc. And that podcast from before I told you about, the financial podcast, if your biggest deal is I need to save money on college, please type that URL, choosefi.com/114, and listen to it. Because it's not just grades or test scores. You could be a resident advisor and get free room and board. There's 100 ways to save money on college if you plan ahead and you're creative. So it's a great blog, a great podcast. 400,000 downloads and growing. So it's by far the most popular podcast I ever will be on, probably. So yes, it's great. Now, last but not least, bottom left corner. Don't be a ghost. Be nice to your guidance counselor at school because they are overworked, they are underpaid. Even at a good high school, there's probably 450 of you for every one of them. It's not personal. So if your kid goes up, it's just basic human customer service and kindness. If your kid goes up to the counselor at the end of junior year, if they don't know them, because they might not, most don't, and says, "Hey, I'm Brian. Nice to meet you. I know you have a really hard job in the fall with everyone applying. What can I be doing this spring, this summer to make your job a little easier next fall?" I'll tell you what. Do transcripts get mailed out in the same order they're requested? We all know the answer to that is no. So a little customer service goes a long way during the hectic, crazy period of the fall. Plus, it's just a nice human thing to do because it's a very hard job. If I were Secretary of Education for Mr. Kemp here in Georgia, I would say, the lottery money, Hope Scholarship is doing good. Can we just triple the number of, not counselors, but specifically college counselors in each public high school in Georgia? It would go a long way because it's hard. There's 450 of them, of kids for every one of them. It's hard. So this is our content info. Reach out to us anytime. Again, we have free mock tests every weekend, in person and virtual. If you already have scores from real tests or not fake tests, mock tests, we're happy to interpret them for you. Reach out anytime. As you can tell, we're passionate about our job. We love our job, and our goal is to help kids get in better colleges, save money, and or both. And so that is great. Hopefully you found this useful. If you found it useful, this is every once in a while we upload a fresh version of this to put on our YouTube channel for kids or for kids and parents who couldn't make one of the live ones that we do a couple times each year. So if this is helpful to you, please go and share the link on YouTube with parents, PTAs, and also if your PTA, your scout troop, etc., is interested in doing a mom coffee or a PTA night where you have people come in, we love doing it. So we speak